Of the Anchorage Assembly. It is Monday, January 23, 2023. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Stern.
Here.
Mr. Solt.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Sweet.
Present.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Zolotel.
Here.
Mr. Cross.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson. Here. Mr. Voland.
Mr. Voland is expected to join shortly on the phone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Rivera, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Perez-Verdia, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight for this special meeting. We scheduled this meeting specifically to take up ballot propositions and bonds that are expected or are being considered for inclusion on the April ballot. The deadline for action on those items is tomorrow, so we are building in a little bit more time to take up these items. I believe there will still be one more item tomorrow for consideration for this April's ballot as well. Before we take up the first item of business, and these are all public hearing items, I want to note that there will be amendments passed out and supplemental laid on the table items, in addition to a resolution that we will take up or lay it on the table when we get to the fives, and I would propose a renumbering at that point. So those items will be distributed soon, as soon as they're available. For this first item, 4A, I would ask the body for a motion to change the order of the day, and the reason for that is because Mr. Solt and I have some constituents who are coming to testify on that item, and they are not able to get here until about 6 p.m. And I want to note for the record, Mr. Voland is here. So, Mr. Vice Chair, could I get a motion to change the order of the day to start with item 4B and then take up item 4A about 6 p.m. Does that work, Madam Clerk?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Quinn Davidson, seeking unanimous consent on this motion. I see thumbs up. Hearing no opposition, the order of the day has been changed, and we will start with item 4B first. We now have before us item 4B, ordinance number AO 2022-118, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly submitting to the qualified voters residing in the Girdwood Valley service area at the regular election on April 4, 2023, a ballot proposition to add to the GVSA's existing powers the power to provide services in support of policies that promote local housing and economic stability. Public testimony on this item is now open. If there are members of the public who wish to speak, please come forward and state your name for the record, the area of the community in which you live, or your community council.
Hi, my name is Mike Edgington. I'm co-chair of Girdwood Board of Supervisors. Hopefully you have in the packet a resolution from us from December supporting this particular item. Unsurprisingly, it partly comes as a response to the development proposals of Holden Hills in Girdwood. And as I think many of the community now realize, and hopefully many of you realize as well, there are particular issues in resort communities around housing which do not affect other, Anchorage more generally and many other communities. And there's a kind of a need for us to sort of do some more work and probably, make proposals for code changes and other things. And this requires some technical skill. And at the moment, we have no body which, has funding for that or the power to do that. So this is an idea which would sort of underpin a number of other sort of strategic proposals we have over the next few years. So by having a service area power, it gives us the ability to potentially raise money through taxes, but it also gives us the ability to hold money from other sources, including grants. It gives us the ability, as we currently use for within our Parks and Rec power, and within our roads and drainage power, the ability to sort of manage parcels of land as well. And the other thing I should mention as well is this is not just a power over support of housing, it's also power over support of economic development. In our community, both are very closely tied together. But there are other projects as well within the community that are tied more directly to economic development, and this gives us some capability to have a stronger local influence and definitely some more local power in doing that. The reason it makes sense as a service area power is we already have a board. We have a board which is elected. It's not a private organization, it's a public organization. We're elected in the same, the same elections as you all are in April. So we already have a representative elected, democratically assembled body. It wouldn't be the same as a private non-profit, for example. Okay, and I'll take questions later if there are any. Thank you.
Or now, whichever. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Mr. Rivera. Mr. Constant, did you want to speak?
Well, I just would say I think it is wise and prudent to ask the voters in Girdwood to consider empowering themselves to hold some more of the reins in the conversation about housing policy. If in fact Girdwood gets this and moves forward with a levy of some kind, I think it's great because there are some of the larger tax-paying sources out there who aren't really participating in the conversation, but I bet they will be if Girdwood says, we're going to levy a tax. And so I think it's best, the power is best closest to the hands of the people who know.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. If Mr. Edgington would come back up, I have a couple of questions. So I'm generally supportive of this. I see that one of the services would be to develop a housing action plan for the Girdwood Valley service area. Can you talk with me about how that potential housing action plan would intersect with the overall housing plan that's put forward by the municipality? We have lots of plans, but no plan stands separate. And I guess my main concern with this is that in some way that I don't want to give Girdwood the impression that a plan would be, I guess, autonomous from the overall structure of the municipality and how we go about making those decisions.
I hope it would be complementary in both meanings of the word or both spellings of the word. The housing action plan is, we have plenty of ideas about how we can make improvements locally, but these are kind of like napkin drawings in most cases, and what we really need is an engineering drawing that we can actually implement. So the housing action plan is mostly, would be getting some expertise to sort of go from our general ideas into something implementable. And again, I hope it's sympathetic with everything else that goes around. It would probably have to be passed by the Assembly anyway, as if it's to have any real force. So that's another way of guaranteeing some sympathy.
And then my follow-up is, how would something like that be different than the district plan that's currently underway in Girdwood?
Yeah. So one of the in the goals, vision, and policies document we already have as part of the district plan or the Girdwood area plan, we actually identified creating an implementation, a detailed implementation plan as a goal out of that. So the housing component of the area plan will be at a somewhat higher level, and then some of the detailed implementations will require a lot more analysis, and we don't really want to slow down the area plan to get all of the details in place for the housing action plan.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the answers to my questions. Just briefly, I'm supportive of this. The only thing I would give me significant pause is some sort of housing authority being created in Girdwood, separate and distinct from the municipality, because even the municipality is not its own housing authority at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of you, I'll go ahead and move LaFrance Amendment number 1.
Second.
LaFrance Amendment number 1, moved by Mr. Rivera, seconded by Mr. Constant. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. We have a number of partners in many of the efforts we work with in the municipality to gather information and organize the community around principles. And one of those developed a very comprehensive housing study, or I don't know if it's a housing study, a kind of an analysis of the current climate in Girdwood relating to housing. And on one page in one section, they had a phrase that was just not quite accurate. And so, and that phrase or concept has been reiterated repeatedly as truth. And so it even found its way into this document. And what this does is it strikes that information out. And the information is attempting to get at kind of the housing mix in Girdwood, but it missed some pretty critical pieces. So it's not possible in the short term to come up with the accurate and detailed numbers. And so it's best to remove this section to ensure that it's an accurate statement in the document.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Is there any other discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2022-118 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4B is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4C, ordinance number AO 2022-116, an ordinance submitting to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage at the next regular election a ballot proposition to amend Anchorage Municipal Charter Section 13.11 to change management authority for the municipality of Anchorage Trust Fund from the treasurer to a fiduciary board. Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body? Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I would move Zalatel Amendment number 1, please.
Second.
Zalatel Amendment number 1 has been moved by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by Mr. Rivera. Go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment indicates that the MOA Trust Fund Board of Trustees would manage the trust consistent with the Uniform Prudent Investor Act as adopted by reference and amended in municipal code. The original language tied it to a specific version of that Uniform Prudent Investor Act. It has not been amended since 1994, but this gives the flexibility not only to deal with potential subsequent amendment because this is in charter, but also the parts that, should it be amended, that would actually be adopted.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Amendment number 1 is approved 12-0. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I apologize for not having this in writing, but I have an amendment for page 2 at line 26. I would like to add a subsection 3 that reads, "The MOA Trust Fund Board shall advise both the Assembly and Administration," period.
A motion has been made by Ms. Zalatel and seconded, or to amend starting on line 26. It's been seconded by Mr. Constant. Madam Clerk, do you have that language, or do you need it repeated?
May I present it up?
Sure.
Thank you.
To amend line 26 to add subsection 3 that reads, "The MOA Trust Fund Board shall advise both the Assembly and Administration."
Yes, that's correct language. To speak to it briefly, Mr. Constant and I have been working on trying to figure out how to be very clear, since this is in the charter, that this board excuse me, reports to both branches of government. Title IV and we've had some issues with how boards work in terms of who they advise. Do they advise both branches of government? Do they not? And so this makes it clear, partly because the Assembly has this, the board will have the fiduciary responsibility, but we will have to be advised by them on what the dividend is and how those monies will affect our budget and budgeting process, which we are fully in control of. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 2.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Amendment number 2 is approved 12-0. Is there any discussion on the main motion as amended? Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Mr. Moore has been our treasurer for a long time, and he's done an excellent job. And we've grown up, and there's just too much risk on having one individual be responsible for making the critical decisions relating to how we invest the treasure of the people of Anchorage. And so in the spirit of doing the right thing for our city, I strongly support the voters approving this. So we should send it to them and get this done. And at that point, we'll have our own trust board like the state does, and probably see even better results, because with the right minds at the table, we can do even more.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2022-116 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4C is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4D, Ordinance number AO 2023-10, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending the 2023 General Government Capital Improvement Budget to include new project Mulcahy Stadium improvements. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony in this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
On behalf of Mr. Peterson, I move to approve.
Move to approve.
Move.
Give it to Pete. No, I think Pete first.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mr. Constant? Cross. Seconded by Mr. Cross. Mr. Peterson, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have an amendment. I move Peterson Amendment 1.
Second.
Mr. Peterson moved Peterson Amendment 1. It was seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Line 25, page 1, we are changing the amount from $300,000 to $350,000. This is actually a two-part amendment. That's part 1A. And I'm not sure if you want to vote on this separate or not. But there's also an amendment 1B that strikes section 3.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on Peterson Amendment Number 1.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-10 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4D is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4E, ordinance number AO 2023-11, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending the 2023 General Government Capital Improvement Budget to include additional parks and recreation projects. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony in this item is now closed. What is the will of the body? Mr. Constant?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant. It has been seconded by Mr. Voland.
No, I have a different idea now, so.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I would move to amend section 3, deleting everything on lines 1, 2, and 3, and stating that all projects have been reviewed by the Parks and Rec Commission.
Second. An amendment has been moved by Mr. Constant, which he will summarize again in a moment. It has been seconded by Ms. Zalatel.
It's pretty simple. All projects have been reviewed by the Parks and Rec Commission. In place of all the language in section 3. Yep, and replacing it with all projects have been reviewed by the Parks and Rec Commission. So it dawns on me now that while we may not be able to add these to the bond, we can add them to the CIB. and putting them on the CIB, Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, and they don't get moved this year, then they get moved into the 2024 CIB, so they're already there. Yes, Mr. Gates.
And Mr. Gates was in the queue, I think, for something else, but go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I was multitasking and not sure if I was tracking exactly what you're doing right now, but I believe that from the work session, this item, it shouldn't pass. It should either not be moved or postponed indefinitely. And I understand we're talking about adding them to the CIB, even though they won't go on the bond or the proposition. But I think that creates its own, I guess, issues. But anyways, my recommendation is just have this item postponed indefinitely or die. And you can always add into the capital improvement program, the 6-year program.
So Dean, my question is, if these are on the capital improvement budget and don't get moved onto the bond, are they not still on the budget?
You know, I want to say yes, but that's a better question for a finance or OMB.
Okay. Welcome, Courtney.
It might
I have
be
a
in the
question.
budget, but nothing will be acted upon for them.
Yep, Ms. Peterson, a
I think is
question
what
for
would
you.
happen.
Instead of postponing this item indefinitely, but rather than putting it on the bond, is there any prohibition from adding it to the budget so that those projects are now officially on the budget?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, no, I don't believe that there's any prohibition from putting it on the budget. It just wouldn't have the funding source of bonds.
Right, and so then it would roll into the next year. It would, in the budget process, you would then see those projects incomplete and acknowledge that they are future funded?
We could roll them to the next year, yes.
That's the intent of moving this right now. So I could also add another section if we need, that is, if not funded, then these items move into the 2024 CIB. Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be helpful.
So, yes.
Mr. Schultz on the amendment.
Sorry, main motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Seeing no other members in the queue on the amendment, members may proceed to vote on the amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes. Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I lost a document that I had up, but we have an email on the capital improvement projects from Parks and Recs, and I believe it was playground development is listed in the email 300, and now I lost my place, but I believe it had a different amount, and I just want to get clarification on that. Yeah, playground development listed in 400, and then it's in the email it's 300, so I just want to get clarification. The rest appear to be correct.
Go ahead, Ms. Alatel.
I see what you're saying, Mr. Sold. The document just sent by Mr. Refuse says that playground development all-inclusive with the short descriptions is listed at $300,000, and the document in front of us is $400,000. Maybe Mike Braniff could come up and tell us which figure we should use.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalatel, both documents that I have here are 300,000. However, it may be good if you'd allow me the time for me to call Steve and see if there's something else that I need to understand.
If I may clarify, so item 4E at line 27 says playground development all-inclusive 400.
I don't have the document that you have, but both of the documents that I have say 300. I don't know if the document that you have predates or is something newer than.
It's the one that we're taking up right now.
Sure.
So, okay, I think that clarification is helpful. Since this is going to be pushed for a year, I don't think there's a problem keeping it at 400 because I'm sure you'll come up with another playground opportunity within a year.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. Thank you, Mr. Stolt. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I'd make a move to amend by adding a new section 4 that states, "Any project with no funding source for 2023 is added to the CIB for 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Let me just get the second. Was that Mr. Voland? Mr. Stolt. Mr. Stolt. A second on Mr. Constant's amendment was Mr. Stolt. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. You know, it dawned on me, there was discussion about postponing this item indefinitely, but all the work and all the community passion and input that's been given to us, I don't want to let all that work just be for nothing. And so what this does is makes an assertive action that says these are priorities next year.
And I will just go ahead and repeat the amendment for Mr. Peterson to amend by adding new section 4 that states a project with no funding source for 2023 is added to the SIB for 2024. Ms. Zalatil on the amendment?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for doing that, Mr. Constant. A little bit of context for the public if you're trying to follow along with what's happening. Typically, we would be able to amend the capital improvement budget, and then those projects would go onto the bond. Unfortunately, this year, when we take up the bond for Parks and Rec at item 4G, the not to exceed number that was put forward by the administration is $2.3 million. And if you look at the full capacity of what we were hoping to add to the capital improvement budget, these are 2.5, and there were some other projects as well. So we're fiscally constrained by the bond put forward by the administration. A number of members tried to bring forward additional items, and we were notified quite late that we wouldn't be allowed to because of that fiscal constraint put forward by the administration. Very atypical process for us, not something we're used to. And it's really unfortunate and disappointing because these projects that come forward are ones that are beloved by the community and that the community has really brought forward and worked toward making happen. So I appreciate Mr. Constant's amendment because they won't get lost, let's hope. Let's hope they roll over into the next budget and they're made a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Yeah, I guess I just want to echo a bit of what Ms. Zalatil said and ask the administration to explain themselves, because we had this discussion in a work session on Friday, and we asked you to solve the problem, since this is a new problem that's only occurred since this administration has arrived, and we asked you to solve the problem, and we haven't heard back, or at least I haven't. So I'd like someone from the administration to speak to this requirement and why we can't move forward on park projects that are really important to our constituents. Thanks.
Mr. Kohlhase?
Through the chair to Member Quinn-Davidson, I recall the discussion from the work center. I don't have an explanation right now as to why this specific situation developed. I can say that I would desire for it not to happen again as well, and I would welcome a work session or informal discussions through the course of the year as we develop the 2024 CIB for all the program areas, and to ensure that I think it would be helpful for everybody to have a better understanding, including me, of the processes that we need to follow to make sure that we don't miss critical calendar dates, which we may have done here. I think, just as an aside, when I was working in PM&E, we routinely had we call them
kind of a CIP 101 session where we would just sit down with interested directors and assembly members and explain, we had some experts come in and explain the CIP process, the CIB process, how projects are developed, how we work with community councils. That has not happened for a number of years. It hasn't happened for 3 years in my memory, so I think that would be helpful for next year. It doesn't solve this problem, and I'm sorry I don't have an answer as to why we're in this situation right now.
May I follow up? You know, I have worked with Mr. Coyce for years, so this isn't meant to be a personal complaint, but I don't understand what's going on. We've amended bonds every year at this time. We've done this before. So what in the heck is going on here? And who put in this not to exceed number? Why is it there if it's not typically there? And why can't bond counsel fix it?
So if I may, through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, my understanding is that it's a notice issue and that to change the title at this point, we didn't have sufficient time to notice it for the public, for a public hearing in time. That's my understanding of what we were told by bond counsel, that it was such a substantial amount that it substantially changed the nature of the ordinance, and we were required to renotice it, and we just didn't have sufficient time to renotice.
May I follow up, Madam Chair? So notice it for what? Because this would be going on the ballot for April. I don't understand what that means, and if we need to get bond counsel on the phone, I'd be happy to ask them to join us. I mean, when we talked about this on Friday, the message was, oh, you guys kind of goofed, but go find a solution. And now I'm hearing there's no solution. We're just going to make the public pay and not having the parks and the amenities that they enjoy and appreciate. So it's just very frustrating, and it's very different than past years. So why is it any different this year than it was last year?
My understanding is that Cynthia Weed, our bond counsel, is on the phone, so she might be able to give you a better explanation.
If bond counsel wants to go ahead, that would be fine to respond.
Cynthia, are you there?
Can I ask a point of information while we're waiting?
Go ahead, Mr. Volin.
I'm still, maybe I'm missing where there's the 2.3 in the title. It's on 4G.
Yep, we're just on 4E, AO 2023-11, which is page 67 in our binders.
Right. That's what I'm looking at. But when they say the title is 2.3, that's 4G. Oh, right here.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant. I did not hear the full question.
So what's happening here is that this is an ordinance that it has a parallel resolution that you'll see tomorrow. When I initially asked to get these into the bond weeks and weeks and weeks ago, it just didn't make it into the flow. And so at the last moment, we had a resolution. We were told the resolution was insufficient for 2 reasons, because you can't waive requirement to go to a commission by resolution. There's some disagreement whether you can do it by ordinance, but for sure we can. But we solved that problem because the Parks and Rec Commission was visited. But separately, we were told you can't increase the amount of a bond so substantially that you would have to go out for additional public hearings. So the actual bond is item 4G. This item is an amendment to the CIB, really just the CIB, that adds these projects to the budget so that they would be in the bond. And so when we got to item 4G, then these items would be associated with that item. So I know it's a little confusing, but it's just a 2-step process. This is step 1 to get it into the bond. And so, because they weren't in the budget. So, and they were moving separately in time because the bond had already been constructed some weeks before. And so for that reason, this ordinance came kind of out of as last minute as it was, not because I wanted it, but because that was the only opportunity we had to get this done by ordinance, which would have allowed the waiver according to most of us. But we don't need the waiver now, so it's kind of a long roundabout way of saying, let's put these in the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Does that answer the question for you, Mr. Boland?
I think I understand. We can pass 4E with this amendment, and these projects that don't have a fund source would be added to the capital improvement budget for 2024. What we're being told by bond counsel is that we cannot amend 4G to that amount, to the 20.
Correct, to add these
Got it.
projects.
Because it
So-
exceeds the 23.
Okay.
One
Thank-
clarification, though, it
Quickly.
wouldn't put them onto the 2024 budget, it would add them to the 2023 budget, so that when we come up with a creative source that Austin is right, Ms. Quinn Davidson is rightly demanding, they're in the budget, they've been reviewed, and they're ready to go. But should no funding source arise in 2023, they will already be in the budget for 2024,
So we're not precluded from using things like the SCMT funds, for instance.
if we have a fund balance.
Got it, thanks.
I want to get back to the queue. We had Ms. Quinn Davidson wanting to hear from bond counsel.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm realizing now, based on Mr. Constant's explanation, that my question might be more about 4G. So if we want to wait and have bond counsel speak to that, but bond counsel, if you're listening, I don't understand what the notice is that you're requiring, and I want someone here, whether it's bond counsel or Dean or Blair, someone to say, I goofed and we messed up because something weird has happened, and I don't feel like we're clarifying for the public what the problem was. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So we have amendment number 2 on the floor, and then we'll come back to discussion on the main motion. Is there anyone else for the amendment? I don't see any other members in the queue. Members may proceed to vote on amendment number 2.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Amendment number 2 is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Anyone else? I suspect we'll come back to this when we get to the bond. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-11 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4E is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4F, ordinance number AO 2023-1, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $34,500,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the costs of road and storm drainage capital improvements in the Anchorage roads and drainage service area.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant and seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Nope.
Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-1.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 14F is approved 12-0. 4F is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4G, ordinance number AO 2023-2, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $2,300,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the cost of constructing, renovating, and equipping park, trail, and recreational facilities, capital improvements in the Anchorage Parks and Recreation Service Area.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Before we get to public testimony, I need to check to see if we have a late on the table item. I'm going to ask for a motion to lay this unnumbered AIM on the table prior to opening public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Zalatel, subject of the AIM, Anchorage Parks and Recreation Commission Resolution Number 2023-01 in support of AO 2023-2, authorizing issuance of general obligation bonds for capital improvements in the Anchorage Parks and Recreation Service Area. Seeking unanimous consent on this motion, on the motion to lay this item on the table. Is there any opposition? Seeing and hearing none, the unnumbered AIM has been laid on the table, and public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to item 4G? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Ms. Zalatel and seconded by Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I do. So this item is the Parks Bond we were just talking about with the capital improvement budget, and it's a not to exceed of $2.3 million. And if you take a historical look back at Parks Bonds, usually they're around $4 million. And they usually fund around 10 to 15 projects. Some put forward, a lot put forward by the community. It's often one where there would be considerable testimony the night we're hearing about the bond proposition, because members are ready to make amendments to bring forward community priorities. There's a priority this year that Mr. Rivera and myself were ready to bring forward around the Cuddy Park and a chalet for the ice rink there. And because of this amount, this not to exceed amount, which my understanding was set by the administration at $2.3 million, those amendments aren't allowed. And that's really disappointing. It's disappointing primarily because when you look at this, the project list is 5 projects. That's it. 5 projects when we typically bring 10 to 15. These, I don't have another word other than disappointing. And it's been the kind of theme because it's not that this administration didn't know that historically this bond is at about $4 million. You can look it up. You can go see which projects are funded. And by setting a artificially low number without any explanation or rationale, as far as I can tell, we've now hamstrung the community in getting many facilities upgraded and parks improvements that it so desperately wants, that make this a great place to live. And so for that, I think the administration should apologize to the public. I think the administration should go to community councils and explain why their projects aren't going to be on the bond. Instead, likely it will be assembly members who go and apologize and make this explanation. But the real blame, and I am going to lay blame here, is with the administration. I wish the mayor was here to explain to you why this is the way it is, or at least his chief of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
If I had to predict what we'll hear from the administration, maybe in front of AEDC, is the reason he did it is because he wants to keep taxes low. And I think that's a shibboleth at this point. It's just a code, and it's a code that demonstrates this mayor's penny-wise and pound-foolish approach to government.
Point of order. I'm no friend of the guy, but I don't think we should speak to motive.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson.
I would just
concur with your point raised.
Then I'll restate what I said, that I believe I will hear him state that the reason why is because he wants to keep the taxes low. And in my opinion, I believe that approach is penny-wise and pound-foolish.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I believe I heard that a request for an explanation about why we couldn't add projects to this, and I thought I'd just give a succinct explanation, I guess. So historically, if any bond proposition drafted by bond council is increased above the amount that's in the title, it would be okay if it's done on time and we have all the information we need. And with this, there were two problems. We didn't have all the information we needed on time, and on time means before a regular agenda, so that a public notice more than 7 days prior to the public hearing today could be published for the S version that increases the total amount of the bond proposition from 2.3 million to whatever, and I guess it's almost doubled. And so the information needed is not just the amount of the capital improvement, but also operations and maintenance costs for adding more length of roadway or more buildings or square footage. So we didn't have all the information in time. That was one problem. The second problem with this one was parks projects require the Anchorage Parks and Recreation Commission review prior to coming to the Assembly for action according to code, and that wasn't bond council's issue, that was our legal issue. That waiver shouldn't be done for a bond proposition, waiver of the commission's review. So we have those two problems with this one, and I hope that's a brief enough explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Voland?
So I have a couple questions, if it's okay. I have a follow-up question on what Dean just said. So when is the deadline, Dean? And I want to ask about notice, because I'm confused about, we have, you know, this is my first time going through this process, and so I will just plead ignorance, but you know, there's many times we have something come before us and we open up for a public hearing and then we move an S version. Can we not change the title and do an S version?
So the title of an ordinance is used as the informative summary of what the ordinance is about, and that's used for publication notices required by Charter 1001, 1001, that requires the clerk to publish the notice 7 days before the public hearing. So with S versions, the title for most of the ordinances we do, it served its purpose, it's given public notice, but for bond propositions, they're different and special. If we're changing the dollar amount, we need to give more than 7 days, the same amount of public notice as a new ordinance of the S versions change and the increase in the dollar amount for the bond proposition. So the deadline you ask, I guess for today, January 23rd, minus 7 days, plus 1 for that day of action, would be minimal amount of time for it to be due. If we had done an S version, maybe on the regular agenda for tomorrow's meeting, I think that would have been timely. And we were putting one together, but we didn't have all the information we needed for, I guess, a number of projects, and the dollar amounts verified on the O&M and put into the S version draft. Sorry, I didn't want to go too long. I hope that answers your question about changing the title of an S version and the public notice required.
Are we past the point then where we have an opportunity to do that?
We're past that point. We can't change this and go above 2.3 million because bond propositions need final action by the Assembly January 24th, tomorrow, 70 days before the day of the election in April.
Okay. Can I ask one other question? Again, because this is my first time going through this process, and I think it sounds like it's been a confusing process even for members who have more experience than I do. What is bond counsel's role when it comes to interfacing with the Assembly? And I think that's a question for bond counsel if they're on the phone.
And I want to note that they are on the phone, but there is a technical issue in which they're unable to unmute.
Okay.
But we'll go ahead and give it another try.
And maybe I can phrase it as a statement if I don't have an opportunity to have my question answered. I guess I am confused about bond counsel's role when it comes to interfacing with the Assembly. And I wonder when we were advised before our prior work session, were members ever reached out to in order for bond counsel to assist with our priorities? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Are we able to unmute them? Sure. Ms. Weed, are you there? We are not hearing you. But we're trying on our end.
Ms. Christensen, do you know of anyone else from the administration on the line so we can just test the line itself?
I do. Ross Griswold is also on the line, and he has been texting me and calling me saying that they are both there, and maybe they can hear each other.
Are they using the same line, or are they calling in from separate lines?
No, they're separate, I believe.
Okay.
They can hear each other, and I think they can hear us, but they can't break in for some reason.
Okay, thank you.
So while the team continues to troubleshoot, I'll go ahead and go through the queue, and then we'll leave your question on the table, Mr. Volan. I think maybe Ms. Quinn Davidson also wanted to hear from bond counsel. Oh, do we have bond counsel? Mr. Risvold or Ms. Weed?
So sorry, Mrs. LaFrance, that was me. I called the number, I unmuted, I said test, you heard it, I can hear you, so I can get it to work. Just saying.
Thank you, Mr. Soltz. Ms. Quinn Davidson, is your question for bond counsel as well?
I have a couple questions, but yeah, is she still having a hard time unmuting?
Yeah, we don't have bond counsel yet, and I thought I would go through the queue to see if members had other questions.
Do you think, or we don't know?
I think they can hear, right,
Okay.
Ms. Christensen?
My understanding is that they can hear. Ross just called me on his phone and said that they could hear. We couldn't hear them.
Okay. We could also take a 5-minute break.
Well, we
and
could do that thing
troubleshoot.
Travis used to do for public
Right, and
participation, too.
they're talking about different options of possibly, I think, calling them. And thanks for your patience, everyone, as we work this out in real time. Do you think we can get them on the line, Ms. Veneklausen? What's our status?
I do have a question for Dean, so maybe I could ask that while you all are working on the technical.
Sure,
What
go
was
ahead,
that,
Ms.
Kevin?
Quinn Davidson.
Okay. So Dean, you said that the 7-day notice requirement, so that's notice to the public that we're going to pass a bond of a certain amount? So as in today, we can't do it from today to tomorrow, the deadline to get on the bond? Is that what the 7 days is?
Correct.
And is that 7 days that comes from Muni Code?
That's from Municipal Charter 1001.
It's in the charter, okay. And so that's a special provision only for things that go on the bond?
No. That provision is for all ordinances. It's a requirement for ordinances to have a public hearing and for 7 days notice prior to the scheduled public hearing. So that's why we introduce, right, and then on one agenda, go to the next or a future one at the public hearing. That public notice is published. So when we do S versions, when you change the title, it's change what has been noticed. And because you're increasing an amount that the public didn't know what the first public noticed, for required to follow, and bond counsel has had this opinion for years or decades that, 7 days prior, you publish another notice saying the amount's larger than it was when you first from the first published notice. So with S versions, not just bond propositions, but S versions, if we're changing the title, we've done that from time to time. I have also emphasized we should do that and submit it before the regular agenda, so it's like 7 days as well. I guess from time to time we've seen that we recommend the title in a lesser time frame that I've advised against, and I don't think that's good practice, but it's been done, I guess, in the sense of, well, there's not much risk. But here with bond propositions, I don't think we want to risk the projects that are there in 2.3 million or 34 million by giving leeway here in bond council. One of their roles, I guess I'll be their answer, but they do produce an opinion about the proposition, and the banks rely on that opinion. That opinion relies on us doing the proper public notice.
May I ask another question?
Sure, and then we'll go ahead and call Ms. Weed.
Okay, great. I have a question for her too. So is it possible to ever waive the 70-day number, and where does that come from?
70 days prior to the election, it's in our municipal code, Title 28. I think it's 28-10-20. Well, that's from memory. We recently amended that. It's been 70 days for a long time, but we recently amended that so that the only time we could go beyond 70 days and have action 60 days before is if there was a veto of an item that you passed at the 70-day mark, or reconsideration that was entered the next day in writing. Then you could have a meeting before the 60-day mark and take action, but only if it's for those two reasons.
So if the mayor, who's not here, were to show up and then veto the parks bond, could we then make any edits to it as we overrode it, or we could only override the specific veto?
We've had that situation before, and, the mayor has 7 days to exercise the veto power. He doesn't really need to be here.
That's not my question. I'm saying if they vetoed it right now.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I know that. Go ahead.
If he vetoes, it comes back to the assembly for a vote to override. If you only vote to override and don't change anything, then that's it. But if you start to change something, then you're doing another, it's sort of like reconsideration. If you make changes and pass it, then there's another opportunity to veto. But that 60-day limit just doesn't accommodate that. It just accommodates the veto override vote, if I've remembered the specific language.
Okay, thank you, Dean. I'm just trying to think of solutions. I'm sure you all have done this offline, but I haven't yet, so thank you. Oh, and then should I let other folks go? Okay.
We'll go back to Mr. Volan, but first we're going to go ahead and call Ms. Weed. And then Mr. Volan with your questions, and then we'll go back to Ms. Quinn Davidson's remaining questions to bond counsel.
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Weed?
Yes.
Great. You are on with the Anchorage Assembly, and the first question for you is from Mr. Volan. Go ahead, Mr. Volan.
Hi there. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for you is, what is bond counsel's role when it comes to interfacing with the Assembly? And I suppose, what is your normal process and timeline for interfacing with us? And when did you advise before our prior work session? And did you ever reach out to members to assist us with our priorities?
In the ordinary course of things, I would not normally just directly approach assembly members or otherwise. My normal administration contacts are the debt officer and the members of the administration. We have done work sessions in the past, but in the ordinary course of things, as bond counsel, we assist in financing matters, and we provide advice and counsel in connection with all of the rules, federal state and local with respect to the issuance of bonds so that we can issue an approving bond opinion. And so, but I don't just normally just pick up the phone and start calling assembly members in that overall process. And I would say I've actually been working with the municipality of Anchorage going back to the early 80s. And so I've actually been through a lot of election procedures with respect to this. And I know that we have worked to try to let people know about, and again, over all the years, about the limitations on the timing, the time between the election itself and the time that the ordinances have to be approved, and then the process, which is in the charter, as well as in the code, for publishing notice of public hearing on the ordinances. And you know, over the years, we've certainly suggested that the whole process has to start early, has to start in enough time so that we can actually accommodate potential changes. And again, I think I mentioned this on Friday, that our job is not to say no. Our job is to try to help people get to where they want to be. I'm sorry that I wasn't aware of these views that were currently held by the assembly, but I know that we had discussions where I said, you know, we need to allow flexibility because, you know, if this is the final number in this time frame we have, we can't increase it. And so we can decrease it, and frankly even suggested, well, you know, if there's going to be error on the side of being expansive, because we can't increase, we can decrease, but we can't increase. And that's simply because of, not because I'm making this decision, but it is because the charter and the code also require a 7-day notice of public hearing, and that 7-day notice of the public hearing publishes the title of the ordinance. And so while, as far as we're concerned, certain modifications could be made to the title, but a substantial increase in the dollar amount of the bond issue is truly depriving the meaning of the notice of public hearing. Now, I certainly, given all this turmoil, I would certainly suggest that the whole process needs to be reviewed. Maybe there are some changes in the code, even charter amendments, or there's certainly revisiting the issue so that the process works more smoothly. I mean, quite frankly, I've certainly been there in late night meetings in the last minute to try to change project descriptions, et cetera. And so we do try to work to get to yes. I really had the strong impression that the dollar amount was set and it was capped, and what wasn't intended or expected.
Thank you, Ms. Weed. Did you have any follow-up, Mr. Voland?
I think, did she finish her statement, or was she cut off?
Are you still there, Ms. Weed?
I think she cut out mid-sentence.
Can we call her back? And we may need to schedule a work session to take up all the questions that members had. I know it's important to provide an explanation about what has happened with the bond, and I'm trying to be respectful of members' desire to have that conversation here on the dais.
Hello? Did I get disconnected?
Yes, Ms. Weed, you did get disconnected. Sorry about that. If you want to go ahead and just quickly wrap up your response to Mr. Voland, I actually was mentioning to the members we may want to schedule a work session specifically on this topic to take up some of these issues.
I don't know how long ago I was disconnected, so I really hesitate to repeat. I was making the point that we certainly, I ordinarily would not be calling individual members of the Assembly in this overall process. I've certainly participated in work sessions, and it may be some time since we've had training sessions or overall work sessions, but I do know that over time, my impression has been that there has been sort of a longer process for deciding what projects we're going to get on the list and the whole process for scheduling for elections, at least until tonight or until this session. I thought we were getting along and more organized in the process for how long it takes and what the whole process is going to be in confirming that all of the projects that wanted to be on the agenda or on the ordinance were going to be in the ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Weed. That's helpful.
I'll say that does answer my question, and I would just say that the conversation that happened at our most recent work session should have happened earlier from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Volan. We'll move on to Ms. Quinn-Davidson's question to Bond Counsel.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance, or Madam Chair. I think part of the frustration you're hearing is in the past, we've been able, at this very meeting and this timeline, to amend, to add something to the bond. And so it feels, I think, for all of us who have been here a little while, like something has changed. And I think there are two things that are causing frustration. One is that I got an email from Chris in one form or another weeks ago saying he wanted to add this. So I guess what I'm wondering is, if Chris alerted everyone weeks ago, why didn't Bond Counsel know? And I don't know if that's on Dean or on someone else, but something happened there. And then I think the second piece is a question for you, Ms. Weed. Is that her? Okay. Which is there typically more wiggle room left in the title? Because it strikes me that there's something strange going on this time, and I wonder if the admin intentionally set that number exactly at what they proposed without leaving any wiggle room to put us in this position. And if you can just speak a little bit to whether that's any different this year than past years, that would be helpful.
Well, I will truly hesitate to ascribe overall motivation. But I do know the issue has come up before, maybe certainly prior administrations, about the issue of increasing the principal amount of the bonds when the principal amount of the bonds, not to exceed X million dollars, was in the title of the ordinance. And I can honestly say, and I know I've been involved for many, many years, that if the principal amount not to exceed X dollars is in the title of the bonds, and frankly, we normally would recommend that it be, but if I were aware that there was a concern about the need to maintain an increase in principal amount, my advice has always been make the dollar amount higher, because we can always go lower. We have never approved an increase in the principal amount of the bonds if the not to exceed number is in the title of the ordinance.
Ms. Weed, I think it would be easier for me if I asked you some yes or no questions, because I'm getting confused by the answer. So is there always a number listed in the title, a value listed in the title?
Yes.
Okay. Does the administration select that number?
I wouldn't necessarily know. I know that there is a number that we ultimately receive.
You receive it from the administration?
Probably, yes.
Has that number in the past allowed for the addition of additional items? Because in this situation, it doesn't.
I think projects is one matter. The dollar amount, that not to exceed dollar amount, is a set number. But we certainly have made adjustments in the actual projects themselves.
Okay, I'm feeling very frustrated with this process, and honestly, even with your answers, it's hard to understand what you're saying. This is different than past years, and it feels like you won't explain why it's different, Dean won't explain why it's different, Blair won't explain why it's different, and I think it's very frustrating for members. What I'm guessing is the admin lowballed it so that we could not add anything, and then Dean maybe dropped the ball on forwarding this. But it's very frustrating. The community is let down, and for what it's worth, if your goal is to represent the assembly and the administration, we've never spoken with you, so I think that we need a work session on how to implement that goal a little better. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. We will certainly schedule at least one work session. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I'm just going to build off that. Obviously, I don't know if this is the correct place where I sit here for us to interrogate and figure out where it went wrong in the process. Obviously, this shows that there's several of us up here who do not completely understand the bond process, and this is a great opportunity for us to meet, collaborate, make sure we're clear on the expectations and our responsibilities, and look to amend the process to make sure there's safeguards so this doesn't happen again. So I'd encourage us all at this point just to come from curiosity. I don't think there's anything we're going to be able to do at this assembly meeting this night to resolve that issue, and we can sit here and continue to debate with bond counsel, but I don't know if it's productive. It's just frustrating us. So I look forward to a work session that says not only what can we learn, how can we prevent this from happening in the future, and how we can contribute to providing solutions, and that may be moving our dates up and moving our assembly agenda so that we're not left with a lack of time to notify the public if there's necessary changes. But I feel as if there's a lot to learn here, and I look forward to contributing to that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Christensen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just put myself in the queue to try to fix the technical issue with bond counsel.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Actually, before I continue through the queue, I want to check with Mr. Peterson, who has... Are you going to move him? Yeah, I am. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
So, take a deep breath. I have a lot to say here and a solution to offer, I believe, thanks to the chair. So I will just state that on December the 7th, I forwarded to our finance staff the request to move these into the bond conversation. That's well over a month and almost a month and a half ago. On December 9th, the items were in flow, and on December 20th meeting, this item was on the addendum. So we also heard at our meeting on Friday that bond counsel had been notified of these projects. And I'm not sure where the breakdown happened after that, but there was clearly a breakdown. That said, the chair just whispered into my ear, what about a concurrent special election? And so I hesitate to dive into this without having fully contemplated what that means exactly in terms of dates and times. But if you look at the code offers a special election may occur with 30 days notice. So we have the 58 days, 60 days requirement for the regular election. By concurrent special election, we could, in the same ballot, in the same envelope, have a special election for these questions, the question of the bond. Why I hesitate is because up in this point, this close to the deadline, I'm afraid to mess around, because what if we make a mistake and all of the projects get somehow scrambled? Right, so that's the risk. The opportunity is we could put forward these projects. I wouldn't want to do them as a second park bond. I would only want them as one unified park bond. If we did that, that would mean not moving this tonight, which means we missed the deadline for a parks bond if we're somehow ruled that we can't do it the other way because of some deadline. And so there's risk involved with the question of doing that. And so with that, what I would like us to do is get through the amendments that we have for this, and then let this one sit until a little bit later in the evening, until the election staff has had an opportunity to consult with the clerk and put down on paper a timeline for all of us to see. And if we all agree that that timeline works, leap into the breach and solve this problem. So with that, I have two amendments on behalf of Mr. Peterson. The first one is an amendment that reads, the purpose statement. This amendment updates Exhibit A to remove the Russian Jack Greenhouse project and add the Mulcahy Stadium Improvements Project upon passage of AO 2023-10. The Mulcahy project was added. The amendment specifically, there's a table.
Did you just move it?
Yeah, okay. Second.
Moved by Mr. Constant and seconded by Mr. Cross. This is amendment number 1 pertaining to the AM.
Yes, and it's Exhibit A, Mulcahy Stadium Improvements. After the 350, it should read 17.5. And then an addition to the 91 there. Floor math is a very scary thing. So it would be 17.5, and then the 91 would be 108.5. Here. Are we on an amendment still? Right.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So then, just to be really clear, everyone has the Amendment 1 in your hands. I would move to amend the amendment to change the numbers. After the 350, add 17.5 under O&M, and then at the bottom, the number should be 108.5.
Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Rivera. So again, the amendment to the amendment under the O&M column for Mulcahy Stadium improvements adds 17.5, bringing the total to 108.5. Is there any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Ms. Quinn-Davidson, on the amendment to the amendment? No? Seeing no members in the queue on the amendment to the amendment, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment to the amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the amendment as amended. Is there any discussion on the amendment to the AM? Seeing no... Ms. Quinn-Davidson on the amendment? No. Okay. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the AM as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment to the AM is approved 12-0. Mr. Constant on that second amendment?
Yeah, thank you. I move Peterson Amendment Number 1, which, if I could get a second.
Second.
Thank you.
Seconded by Ms. Zalatel.
This one is just a conforming amendment that does the same thing that we just did. At Section 3, Page 3, beginning at line 36, it changes 91,000 to 108,500, which matches what we just did, and then from 29 cents to 34 cents down below.
Is there any discussion on this amendment? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended.
Last comment. Just to say that that workaround may not work, so don't hold your breath.
May not apply to ballot bonds.
Yeah.
Okay, next in the queue is Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Falsey just tuned in and was listening to the conversation, and so he sent me an example of a situation where we changed the value in the title of the bond that bond counsel prepared, and there was explanatory comments added by Assembly Counsel. I just asked Dean to distribute this to the members because he sent it to Dean and me. Dean's saying he used this as an example last Friday. So I guess I would like to know, this number was changed, but we're being told now we can't change the number. Is that because of the scale of the change, or why is this different than what we've done in the past? And I think bond counsel should answer it, but if bond counsel can, if she can just be succinct and clear as to why this is different.
One thing I don't have in front of me is what's in front of you. I just would point that out. I don't have a context for it, so it might be difficult for me to explain something I don't have the context for. Sorry.
Ms. Weed, do you want me to just read it quickly? Just the sentence, just so you can hear what the difference is?
Okay.
So this was Ordinance AO number 2019-5 as amended. Here's the title, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $32,700,000 and of general obligation, blah, 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 blah. This is for roads and storm drainage. And it was changed from $32.7 million to $33.24 million through the Assembly amendment process. So this is the process that I remember that we do every single year. So my question is, why could we change it then and we can't change it now?
It isn't that long ago, I should remember, but I have the impression that we had the time to actually modify the notice of public hearing.
Okay.
And that has to do with the timing of when ordinances are introduced. And so that I'd have to go back and actually look at the schedule of when the notice of public hearing was approved and the time frame between the publication of the notice of public hearing and the actual adoption of the ordinance. I'm not saying it didn't
I can add
happen.
a little more information. So Mr. Falsey said that this happened in the second January meeting for the timing, but Dean just replied to the email and said that the total increase was a 1.6% increase. And you rationalized, your opinion was that there was no reasonable basis for a legal challenge. It's not very clear to me what this is.
Right, and you'll notice that this was, the proposed change was from 2.3 million to very substantially higher.
So who determines the cutoff for what the increase can be? It doesn't sound like the charter, because this is a subjective exercise.
It is. Well, I think subjective is the question that has to do with, and I think people have asked me, so what is material? And it is is it 2% or 5% or 10%? But I know it's not 40%. And one of the concerns that I would even have expressed to Mr. Falsey is that, unfortunately, this can be a slippery slope, because once somebody goes, well, I think we can go up 5%, next time let's try to go 10%. Oh, next time maybe it doesn't matter at all. And so I think it is, it can be a very slippery slope, and as to when somebody's going to say this is substantial and you have misled the public, but I have to be very comfortable that no reasonable argument can be made to the contrary.
Okay.
And I don't want to be caught into saying, oh, it's 1% or 2%, because I think we have to take all the facts into consideration.
Does the charter, can I ask another question?
Sure, and then I would like to move on.
Well, I'm just wondering, we can probably add 2 projects to this. I mean, if it's not substantial or material.
And by move on, I mean follow Mr. Constant's suggestion to set this particular one aside while folks do some research.
Oh, I didn't know there was that suggestion. Sorry.
For tonight, and come back to it after we dispense with some of the other items.
And we'll come back to it tonight? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I guess, can I just ask one final thing?
Sure.
So we'll know, we'll have that information to work with. Before we were told you can't go above that number, but that's not actually true. You can go above that number, you just have some limit that I'm now hearing is either no material change or no substantial change. Could you just say what the wording is that we have to work within?
If you want to lock me down, I'll say 2% or 5%. But I don't want this to be a sliding scale. This isn't. In other words, there has to be, and clearly what was presented was substantially higher. And you keep mentioning, and I hear the term projects. The number of projects is not the issue. The size of the bond issue and the scope of the bond issue as a change from what was initially offered, that is the issue. It's the maximum dollar amount. And I will suggest that I have said, it was $2.3 million. In the midst of some of these discussions, I said, if there's a possibility it could go higher, why not just have a bigger number? Because you can always decide to go down.
Sorry, Ms. Weed, Ms. Sofrancis trying to move along.
Thank you, Ms. Weed.
Can I just, what I'm trying to ask, is there, you mentioned material, you mentioned substantial, are those words from the charter, or is that just how you've interpreted it? Just so we can try to solve the problem. I'm not trying to pick on you, I'm trying to actually figure out what the rules are.
The notice has to describe with, in the charter, the notice has to be to give appropriate notice of what is being offered. And so, yes, there is a judgment call there, and if it's 3.2 to 33,000,027 to 33,000,007, that is not a dramatic change. The change that has been presented is quite dramatic as a percentage of the size of the bond issue. And it was beyond what anyone, and not just me, would have considered to be material. And it's not as if there's a black and white line.
Thank you, Ms. Weed. I think we will come back to some of these questions, and perhaps we can get some specificity that Ms. Quinn Davidson is seeking offline. So we will now go back to item 4A, which we had moved to later in the agenda to allow for some folks who are here to testify. So we now have before us item 4A, ordinance number AO 2023-8, an ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly submitting to the qualified voters residing within the proposed Anchorage Bowl Chugach State Park Access Service Area at the regular municipal election on April 4, 2023, a ballot proposition to create the ABCSPASA and to amend sections of the Anchorage Municipal Code to conform to the results of the election. Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Mr. Connolly, you are speaking on behalf of the Road Board as a member of the road, an officer of the Road Board.
Correct.
I will give you 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Assembly members. Thank you for taking the time during the special work session on Friday to learn about and discuss this important ordinance. For the past few years, I've been talking to everyone I possibly can, looking for a long-term solution to improve and maintain the privately maintained roads that lead to Chugach State Park. I have talked to many of our state and city leaders and heads of departments in maintenance and operations for city and state roads. I'd also like to mention that I really appreciate my district's representatives, Randy and Suzanne, for supporting me in this effort. Thank you. The 1980 Chugach State Park Master Plan, the 2010 Hillside District Plan, and as well the 2012 Municipality of Anchorage Chugach Access Plan all call for funding solutions for roads that are primarily used to access Chugach State Park but are currently maintained with local service area funds. In 2012, the Chugach Access Plan on page 9 states the following: many neighborhoods adjacent to the park boundary have roads maintained through a limited road service area, which is also known as a LRSA, that have limited funding and restrictions on how LRSA monies can be used. State contributions for road maintenance have not been available for some time. New ways to pay for capital improvements, operations, and maintenance will be needed to adequately provide for access hubs and trail and green space connectivity. It further goes on to state the following. Other access funding approaches are proposed in the Hillside District Plan that include the creation of a new Anchorage Bowl wide access district using general obligation bonds, revenue bond funding tied to a non-property tax revenue stream or a bed tax, and assessing a property tax on an area-wide basis. Often is the case, these roads receive greater than 50% of their traffic from park users. In the case of one study, Glen Alps Road saw 98% park traffic and 2% neighborhood traffic. Upwards of 1,880 cars a day were counted on average in July of 2007. And this is before the road was paved and the parking lot was expanded and paved. On Basher Drive in Stuckagon Heights, a past survey showed more than 60% of vehicles were park traffic. Canyon Road, which accesses the popular Sunnyside Trail for Flat Top as well as the Rabbit Lakes Trail, is estimated at 99% park traffic beyond Echo Canyon Drive. While there are only 5 houses on that section of road, on any given day from the spring through the fall, you'll find 100 to 200 cars lining both sides of the road. In the winter, the road is barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass each other, but is a very popular backcountry ski destination. It's also very busy on spring days as it's one of the first areas to thaw in the park. This road was not designed to accommodate that volume of traffic, and it is currently in a state of complete disrepair and failure. We have tried for years to work through a solution, but have not had the budget to afford a proper fix. Across the valley from Canyon Road, Snow Bear, Black Bear, and Honey Bear are estimated at 90 to 95% park traffic accessing the McHugh Trailhead. As the service area budgets are often severely limited, it is almost impossible to pay for improvements. In the case of Bear Valley, I was told that their budget is not even $100,000 per year. This means that all snow removal, summer grading, brushing work, etc. takes up their entire budget, and they rarely have any money left over for capital improvements. Doing a $500,000 capital improvement project is impossible with service area funding in these circumstances. Considering the majority of the traffic on these roads is almost entirely park traffic, it's also not fair to the local residents to bear these costs. One thing I would like to emphasize to both the Assembly and the residents of Anchorage is that the majority of the residents that live near Chugach State Park access points actually love having the park as a neighbor. We don't mind park users using our neighborhood roads to access the park. You can obviously find a few vocal anti-park people, no doubt. However, based on the interactions I've had with many community council members, service area board members, and my own constituents and neighbors, I'm happy to say that most of us really want to see Anchorage residents and out-of-state visitors enjoying the park. It really is a unique treasure that we should work on improving access to and making more available to all. Park use has increased dramatically over the past few years. This is a trend that is projected to continue. We really need to create a long-term plan and strategy to effectively manage the situation before it gets completely out of control and we are reacting rather than proactively planning. The various Chugach management and access plans I mentioned at the beginning of my speaking time all predicted these problems and proposed the same solutions we are here seeking today. This ordinance is the beginning of a long process to finally create change and make sure that future generations have safe, protected, and well-maintained access to Chugach State Park.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. I do have a member with a question for you. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, this sounds like a good idea. Can you tell me why it wasn't extended throughout all of Anchorage and didn't include Eagle River or Girdwood into this proposed plan?
I don't know the specifics to that, but I would assume just from previous experience that due to Eagle River's general opposition to bond packages and things like that and feeling like Anchorage is separate from Eagle River, they would probably vote no on this. That's my hunch, but I didn't write this and I didn't put it together.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Welcome. Are you representing a community council?
My name is Bruce Talbot. I've lived in Stuckagon neighborhood for over 30 years. This neighborhood is in the Basher Local Road Service area, and half the perimeter of the neighborhood is surrounded by Chugach State Park. Although I'm not a member of the LRSA board, and I don't speak for the LRSA, I have talked with them. The chair couldn't make it tonight, but they are supportive of this ordinance. Our neighborhood was one of the main entrances to Chugach Park, known as the Basher Trailhead, which is on top of the big hill if you've been up the Campbell Airstrip Road. We also have another trailhead that accesses the peak known as the Dome, with trails branching off that connect to the upper North Fork of Campbell Creek, which is also in the park. Finally, we have many smaller undeveloped trailheads in the neighborhood that access both State Municipal Park and J-Bear. During the winter weekends and all week in the summer, our two major trailheads are often full. In particular, the Basher Trailhead at the top of the big hill can have as many as 10 or 15 cars parked along the side of the road, which is our only access to the neighborhood. This trailhead often only accommodates about 15 cars and fewer in the winter. And so in the winter months, with a narrow road, it's much more difficult to get in and out of the neighborhood. Our LRSA is entirely funded by the mill rate added to the Stuckagon homeowners' taxes, and under current law, roads within LRSAs are not eligible for municipal bonds. In the past, the Municipal Traffic Department has taken traffic counts, this was mentioned earlier, which indicate that sometimes over half the traffic in the Campbell Airstrip Road is for park visitors and not residents of Stuckagon. Nonetheless, the LRSA maintains part of the road, particularly that closest to the state park. In particular, the Basher Trailhead needs to be expanded. We have talked with state parks, and they don't have the money to work on it, nor do they have money to fix the big hill. This hill is also badly potholed, particularly in spring. In addition, the existing parking lot needs to be modified to improve sight distances because the egress and entrance is blind from the people entering the neighborhood. And then finally, I'd just like to note that the ordinance, if we could get bonds, we could match with the state. Previously, we matched with BLM for $2.5 million for a safer bike trail along the Campbell Airstrip Road. And if we could get bonded on the upper road, we could use that money to get a match from the state or other entities. So I support the ordinance, and I hope you pass it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Welcome. Are you representing a community council or road board?
I am. I'm the chair of the Bear Valley LRSA. My name is William Minnis, and I'm the chair of the Bear Valley LRSA. And I've been elected that position for at least 20 years, although, as I said, most of my elections are unopposed. Ours is the service areas, it's one of the service areas that will come within the scope of the proposed Anchorage Bowl Chugach State Park access service areas, since we have a park trailhead that is directly accessed through our road system. Our LRSA has approximately 2.5 miles, a little fewer, and a budget of approximately $52,000. And we have a mill rate of about 1.5. All of our roads are dirt, and all of them were created by having a dozer push shrubs and trees beneath the ground, and that's our road bed now. Every home on our LRSA every home on my road and the LRSA is an owner builder, and that's still true of most of the homes there. So speaking for my LRSA, it would be a misrepresentation to say that we are a LRSA of rich hillsiders. We have fewer Chugach visitors than Glen Alps for sure, but the impact of the ones that we do have is real. Our LRSA board supports the idea that the LRSA residents should not be solely responsible for maintaining roads that are frequently used by non-LRSA residents. So we do support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Will you be representing a community council tonight?
I'm president of the Glen Oaks Community Council, but I won't be speaking on behalf of them because we haven't taken this issue up at our meetings yet. But I just wanted to voice my support for the ordinance.
And could you state your name?
My name is Greg Kuiper. I'm the president of the Glen Oaks Community Council. While we haven't taken this ordinance up at our meeting, the road and parking issues have long been a hot topic at our meetings. I'm here to support this ordinance because I'm all for moving toward a solution to this problem that has not only lingered since I moved here in 2002, but gotten much worse with increased park usage. Most of the usage, wear and tear on Canyon Road is by park users, as Joe said, possibly 99%. Most people are not aware of who pays for the maintenance and improvement of these roads. I presented this issue to the Chugach State Park Citizens Advisory Board. Not even the access committee of that board was clear who paid for the maintenance and upgrades. So I was happy to provide them that information. Let's see. Two of the state's most used access points, Glen Alps and Flat Top Sunnyside trailheads, are paid for by this small number of people who reside in the Glen Alps Road service area. I've also brought this issue up at our community council meetings to our state representatives and assembly members multiple times. So I'm really grateful to Joe Connolly, Roger Marks, Chairwoman LaFrance, and Assembly Member Solt for putting something together that has potential to get the funding we need to improve our roads and parking lots, perhaps. My hope is that with this ordinance passed, we will be able to disperse the use in the park to include areas like Bear Valley and Potter Valley, where there's currently very limited public access. I want our leaders to direct funding that complies with the Chugach Access Plan from 2012 and the Chugach State Park Management Plan adopted in 2016. I'm not clear as to how this ordinance will get us closer to that goal of more dispersed use, but I support this ordinance as the next step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Welcome. Are you speaking as an individual?
On behalf of myself, as an individual. Thank you. My name is Mike Edgington from Girdwood. As someone who lives on the eastern side of Chugach State Park, we do not have the same pressing issues in terms of parking and access as are happening in the areas adjacent to the Anchorage Bowl, but I still think this is an excellent idea, and I can definitely see times in the future where it may be advantageous to extend the area, and there is a mechanism to extend service areas which we could potentially use in the future. Girdwood often does vote in favor of bonds, so we may be a good location to do this. I would like to specifically support both Amendment 1 and Amendment 2. Amendment 1 because it changes the terminology from Anchorage Bowl specifically to allow easier extension in the future, and Amendment 2 because I serve in a service area that is not just a LURSA, so again, I think expanding that language would be beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Mr. Solt. We have amendments.
I've got them. Oh, if you want to, yeah, please. Ms. LaFrance, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move amendment number 1.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Ms. LaFrance, seconded by Mr. Solt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I speak to it?
Please, you have the floor.
As the last testifier mentioned, This amendment proposes to change the name to a simplified CASA. Thank you, Mr. Connolly, for that suggestion. And that would make it easier just because it's shorter, and also for anyone else, any other areas that might be inclined to join, whether that's to the north or south of the bowl. I have a question for Mr. Gates, because I may want to make an amendment to an amendment.
Please.
Mr. Gates, I think we have a couple other small amendments that may be coming forward, and I would like to, if not, I would like to strike the word bond in the proposal as well, to align with the discussion we had on Friday at the work session. Is that in a subsequent amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's 3 more amendments not distributed yet on this item that are coming, and I apologize you don't have them yet. It's been busy to get them all straightened out. So amendment number 3 will do exactly what you are asking about, and then there will be 2 more.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Then I will not propose an amendment to this amendment.
Oh, you're done? Okay. Anyone else in the queue on the amendment? Okay. Members may proceed to vote on the France Amendment 1.
Mr. Peterson on the amendment?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Amendment number 1 passes 12-0.
Move amendment number 2. Second.
Moved by Ms. LaFrance, seconded by, I believe, Ms. Alatil.
May I speak to it?
Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. This amendment refers to service areas more generally. The initial language referred to LRSAs and WRSAs, but actually, as in the case of Girdwood with GBOS and also Glen Alps, they're not specifically limited road service areas or road service areas, even though they have that road service responsibility. And that language in subsection C provides that more general information or description.
Anyone else? Hearing seeing none, members may proceed to vote on the amendment, the France Amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we may have to come back to this item while we await the other amendments, but Ms. Zelatil, go ahead.
Thank you. So with the first amendment, I noticed we just amended the title to the ordinance, and I'm finding a little bit of irony there in that for a ballot proposition, we can amend the title to the ordinance. That changes the acronym by which this will be colloquially referred to, the CASA. I can't pronounce the other one, so I'm not even going to attempt to. However, it's really telling because the prior conversation we had, and I will circle back to it, was that we couldn't amend the title when it involved a bond. However, I believe the code provisions on the notice are all the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatil. So I think we are going to have to set this one aside for now and come back on the amendments. I do want to note that over the weekend, we received a resolution from the Rabbit Creek Community Council, and actually Nancy Pease is available if anyone has questions about that in support of this ordinance, and I will work to get that as an aim, I guess, for the next meeting, Madam Clerk, so we have that in the record. But at this point, we'll go ahead and set this one aside and go back to, because we're waiting for 3 more amendments or so. And also, I haven't officially handed the gavel over to the Vice Chair, but just to let everybody know, one of the active areas of discussion on this ordinance is the boundaries of the service area, and Mr. Solt and I have received some feedback from some constituents along Turnagain Arm who are interested in being included or learning more about being included. And so one possibility would be that we might ask the body to postpone final action on this to tomorrow. I'm just saying that's a possibility, and obviously haven't heard from Mr. Solt on that, but I wanted to let the body know. So we'll set this one aside and come back to it with the other amendments. And we will go ahead and move on to item 4H. And we now have before us item 4H, ordinance number AO 2023-3, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $4,620,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the costs of area-wide public safety and transit improvements at the election to be held.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Anyone at all? If so, please come forward. Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second. A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-3.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
I believe Mr. Cross is out of the room. But I'll vote in this, okay.
Item 4H is approved 11-0.
I can change his vote if he wants. Mr. Cross, would you like to vote on this item? Mr. Cross is voting a yes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item 4H is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4I, ordinance number AO 2023-4, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $100,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the costs of acquiring a command vehicle in the Girdwood Valley service area at the election to be held in the municipality on April 4, 2023. Before I open the public hearing, I'm going to go to Mr. Soltz for a motion to lay an unnumbered AIM on the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to lay this unnumbered AIM from the Girdwood Board of Supervisors in response to this AO. And then once that's approved, I would also like to urge a no vote on this AO.
So I'll second the motion to lay the item on the table. Thank you, Ms. Zalatel, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. A motion to lay this item on the table has been made by Mr. Solt. Did you want to speak to why this item is being laid on the table, Mr. Solt?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Madam Chair. So originally when this item was put forward, it was looked at as a general bond across the municipality. And the way it's been written up and the way it has to be written up is a bond for the Girdwood Valley. And based on that, Girdwood is not in favor of this, so we'd like to either withdraw it or properly just let it vote through and vote and urge a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solt. I'm going to seek unanimous consent on the motion to lay the unnumbered AIM on the table. Is there any opposition? Seeing and hearing none, the unnumbered AIM has been laid on the table. And I will now open public testimony on item 4I. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you. Irene Queednow. As we have talked about it many times, the Girdwood community serves all of us, all of our Anchorage people. We go to Girdwood to ski, to recreate, and so all of us should pay for this, not just the Girdwood Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony in this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to decline.
Postpone indefinitely would work.
Okay, yeah, I'll postpone indefinitely. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Solt to postpone this item indefinitely. It's been seconded by Mr. Cross. Mr. Solt, do you wish to speak to this any further?
No, Madam Chair.
And I just want to note procedurally, the reason why we asked for a motion on this is because if it was not moved, then the supplemental item that was just laid on the table would not be moved either. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you. Could Mr. Edgington come up and explain what the supplemental item means and why there's opposition to this funding for a command vehicle? Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. I wouldn't characterize it as opposition. I would just say that we, until only a few days ago, we had never, sorry, I'll take a step back. We never requested a Girdwood-only ballot proposition for this. We actually would not for this amount of money. We do have some capital funds we could potentially put towards this, which is what we probably will do. And this has not come in front of us. So basically what we have here is a bond which would be charged to the Girdwood Valley Service Area, which GBOS has never discussed, has never asked for. OMB and the administration have never come and told us about it. So it seems like kind of a violation a little bit of what a service area is for anyway. But we have never discussed it, so we cannot support it.
Thank you. And if I may ask a follow-up, before Girdwood-specific bonds are typically advanced, do they usually come talk to GBOS and ask what your opinion is and give you notice?
Typically, we would ask for them for Girdwood-specific. So in that case, we've already made the request.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Chief, do you know if Chief Weston requested this vehicle? So he's indicating that, in fact, she did. Please, Mr. Edgington, come on back up.
Yeah, the issue isn't so much the payment of the vehicle and the requirement for the vehicle, it's whether it's done through a bond or not. GBOS has already committed in our 2023 budget capital funding, capital savings towards this. So we never requested a bond, we don't want a bond, basically. Although we have not officially discussed it because we didn't know about it until very recently.
Okay, so from where I sit, should Girdwood come back and ask the municipality to fund this vehicle, I will be a solid no.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Voland?
Sorry, Mike, what amount do you have in capital savings for this?
I don't have that number to hand, but we knew that it needed to be replaced, so we had already saved money, and we have enough to cover this and a few other things. We actually have another engine which needs to be replaced by about 2025, so we've been saving towards that.
You have enough for the 100,000?
Yes, we already have the capital for this particular vehicle, and on top of that, we've been saving towards a replacement engine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Mr. Solt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think just to add my take on it, I think what we were trying to do initially was to pull this forward 1 year to help Girdwood and the chief out with a new command vehicle. And with that, we were looking at a municipal-wide bond or SCMT funds. And I think when we had the work session, it migrated to a Girdwood Valley bond, and that's not what they're in favor of. So we're going to postpone indefinitely and then go to a capital for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Solt. Mr. Constant?
I'm pretty sure we funded a vehicle for Girdwood out of SCMT funds. And so, so there's no argument that this was a mistake, SCMT funds. No, Girdwood has a responsibility to provide for their community, and Anchorage has been very generous in stepping forward and helping. But at some point, you get to the place where the community believes it's our job to fund their infrastructure. And we have to be careful of that, because I'm starting to see threads of that, and I'm fearful of what that means for the future of that community. It's a dependency that's being created that I don't think is appropriate. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important to differentiate between some of the functions of the Girdwood Volunteer Fire Department. One component is specifically for the service area. The other component is providing area-wide service to the residents of the municipality along the corridor of the Seward Highway. But I don't want you to take my word for it. I would invite Mr. Edgington and or the Chief Schrage up here to clarify. And also, my understanding is there are three command vehicles total, 2 for the service area, 1 for the service area, 2 for area-wide response. And if one of you would be willing to corroborate or correct what I've said, I would be grateful. Welcome, Chief.
Hello, Chief Schrage for the record. Yes, that's basically correct. You provided the SEMT funding for 2 command vehicles. Girdwood's asking for their support along the Turnagain Arm, along the Seward Highway for the EMS services that they provide to those communities and on the highway.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Edgington?
Yeah, for the record, when I say we're looking, we are preparing to spend our own capital savings on this fire vehicle. It's not a question of asking for money from Anchorage next year or in a future capital bond. It's actually money we've already saved from our tax revenue, and we intend to spend that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgington. Is there any further discussion on the motion to postpone this item indefinitely? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to postpone AO 2023-4 indefinitely.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The motion to postpone item 4I indefinitely is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4J, ordinance number AO 2023-5, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $2,625,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the costs of fire protection capital improvements in the Anchorage Fire Service area. Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant and seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-5.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4J is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4K, ordinance number AO 2023-6, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $450,000 of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the costs of acquiring a rescue truck in the Chugiak Eagle River service area at the election to be held in the municipality. Thank you. Public testimony on this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony on this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve. Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Mr. Cross. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Chief, is this one that's similarly situated to Girdwood that would be paid by Chugiak and Eagle River, or is this one that is area-wide pay?
Chief Shragi again. I believe that the Chugiak Board of Supervisors proposed to pay for this on an area-wide GOB, but the way that it was presented is as a fire service area bond.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Constant? Do we have an amendment for this item? Oh, apparently I have an amendment for this item. Thanks for the backup, folks. Just kidding. Do you want to move it, Mr.
Sure.
Constant?
I move LaFrance Amendment 1.
Second.
LaFrance Amendment 1, moved by Mr. Constant, seconded by Mr. Rivera.
Ooh, that's a big difference. Yeah, so this corrects an apparent drafting error in the ballot proposition language where it should indicate that the cost to taxpayers per 100,000 of assessed taxable property, but mistakenly says total amount of the bond. Yeah, so that's a good correction.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Just giving members a moment to read that amendment and check if anyone has any questions. And I believe this language was provided either by the administration or with Assembly Council. Is that correct, Mr. Colhase?
I apologize, Madam. Which language?
The language of the amendment, my understanding is the request, and maybe Ms. Peterson.
That is correct, yes.
That this came from the administration.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1.
Mr. Peterson on the amendment?
Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AO 2023-6 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Item 4K is approved 12-0. We now have before us item 4L, resolution number AR 2023-4, a resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage appropriating an amount not to exceed $729,900 to the area-wide general and various service areas capital improvement projects funds of premiums from the sale of the 2022 general obligation bond series A for the payment of bond issuance costs in an amount. Thank you. Public testimony for this item is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? If so, please come forward. Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony in this item is now closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Mr. Cross. Is there any discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve AR 2023-4.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
L is approved 12-0. So before we go back to 4A, we will return to 4G. Mr. Constant?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to postpone this item to tomorrow night.
Second. A motion has been made by Mr. Constant to postpone item 4G to the regular assembly meeting of January 24, 2023. It's been seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I just think it's unwise to act precipitously when we have another meeting scheduled tomorrow that's before the final deadline for the regular election, so that we can make sure every little box is checked if there is an alternative path.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
I just have a general comment that doesn't necessarily have to deal with that, but I wanted to share it before we dispense with this item. Would it be appropriate to share it now?
Go ahead, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
I just wanted everyone to know that I did come across an email, someone shared it with me, where Dean reached out to Cynthia Weed and Ross Risvold from the administration on November 30th, asking for a 30-minute discussion about how we could add things to the bond to make sure that we get the right process. So there was a lot of back and forth in this email, Dean asking again and again for them to engage. So I'd just like to thank Dean for doing that. I think he put in the work to try to be collaborative, and it seems that it didn't end up being that way, but thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion. Are you asking to be in the queue?
I just want to reiterate what Austin said, that I also have communications from Mr. Gates to the administration and onto the agenda by the meeting of December 20th, which was well in time for this to be addressed. And so I just, on his behalf, say, I'm not sure still where it happened, somewhere between our branch and the other side.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to postpone item 4G to the meeting of January 24, 2023.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The motion to postpone item 4G to the meeting of January 24 is approved 12-0. We will now go back to item 4A.
Ms. LaFrance recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move amendment number 3.
Second.
Moved by Ms. LaFrance, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Ms. LaFrance, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment provides clarification that in the future, the service area may be able to vote to levy taxes to collect for capital improvements as well as for bond financing, or as we discussed in Friday's work session, other proposals that could include funding operational expense. So there is a whereas that is amended at line 2, where it adds or set a tax levy, and then further down, removing bond into places, and then adding language spending generally or for a particular project. It also strikes the language saying that voters in Eagle River, Chugiak, Birchwood, Girdwood, and Turnaganar would not be taxed for any voter-approved bonds for this service area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? Mr. Cross. You have the floor.
Thank you. Why are we striking that Chugiak and Girdwood would not be included since we have our own Parks and Rec and we cover our own roads?
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why is that line being struck?
Yeah.
I had a little bit of back and forth with our attorneys on this because in the short term, where it clearly applies, where this is pertaining to the bowl, I think that language would actually be helpful. But my understanding is it keeps it open for future changes, but I would ask Dean to weigh in on why that needs to be struck.
Mr. Gates?
Yes, I will try. And so this proposition is being sent to voters for the creation of the service area. It will only go to voters that are within the boundaries described in this proposed service area. And so it's not going to go to the voters that are outside, which are Eagle River, Chugiak, and I guess depending on another amendment, number 5 later, it doesn't include voters in Turnagain Arm, Girdwood. So this sentence, I guess we sort of first had it here as, I guess, our instincts and our experience in doing bond propositions. This is on the bond proposition. This is the same sentence, but on bond propositions, the whole municipality is asked to pledge its full faith and credit, so all the voters see it, even the ones that don't pay. That's why that sentence is in the bond proposition ordinances. But this one is different because it doesn't go area-wide to everybody. It only goes to the ones within the area. So who are we telling are not going to be taxed? Nobody that sees this actual proposition. And so that's why we've deleted it here. But you see in the future, maybe there'll be an obligation bond for this service area that would go to all voters, and we'll have this sentence there to tell those that are outside the area, you're not paying for it, don't worry. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Besides, I don't think legally you could have a bond that would affect and tax Girdwood, Turnagain, and Eagle River without them being subject to the vote anyway. So, thank you.
Actually, if I could follow up. So for this part, creating the service area, it will not go to those folks who are excluded. However, bonds would because of the full faith and backing issue. It's the problem that actually Girdwood has from time to time, where a bond proposal is put forward where only Girdwood residents would be levied, but everyone in the municipality has to vote to approve it, even though they're not going to pay anything. So it's very helpful sometimes to make it clear who would be levied to pay for the bond. And I had forgotten about that part until Mr. Gates clarified for that. Just creating it, it won't go to everybody. It's just later, if there are bonds, then it would go to everyone for that full faith and backing of the municipality, which we'll cover in one of our 2 or however many work sessions on bonds we have.
And complete revision of the process in code. Anyone else? Hearing seen none, members may proceed to vote on the amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
A vote of 12-0, that amendment is approved. Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. I move amendment number 4. Second.
Moved by Ms. Alatel, seconded by Ms. LaFrance.
So amendment number 4, thanks to Ms. LaFrance for putting this together, is in response to my comments that this go beyond simply roads and parking lots, but also to support park amenities or park access amenities. I think we've seen investments in trails or access to spaces in Anchorage without the attendant or concurrent investment in amenities, and that's led to issues. So this leaves that open for that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
So with the current zeitgeist of this body, I'm going to sound really retrograde right now, but I'm going to make a slight amendment to the amendment if I can get a second, and that would be to add after amenities the words including parking. Because while park access supporting amenities is it's kind of euphemistic to me, and I don't want it to be unclear to people that we aren't going to figure out a way to allow people places to put cars up there, because that's the conflict right now.
And is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Cross. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
People are parking on the roads up there, and in the conversation relating to the work session, we heard there was a kind of a perception that all we could do is improve the roads. And I don't know what park park access supporting amenities means, but I want to make sure it communicates to people that we're going to figure out a way to open up some land or provide places for people to park vehicles to turn around. Even if they're buses carrying people up there, we need a way to do that. So to me, when I think of park access supporting amenities, I think of the Iron Ranger and some toilets, but I don't think of a place to put the vehicles to get people there. So I would urge your support.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Voland?
Thank you. I do support the amendment, and I think there's a lot of park access supporting amenities that could be considered, things like wayfinding, et cetera. But I think I actually want to amend the amendment. And I would say...
Actually, we already have an amendment to the amendment underway, so you'll have to hold until we dispense with the amendment to the amendment and can take others.
So, as a mover and a seconder, Ms. Altel has whispered in my ear maybe a better way to write the language. And so I guess you have the floor next, and then from there, I would probably be amenable to changing the main motion or the amended motion.
Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. So I don't want park access supporting amenities to be about parking. That's not the intention there. But road and parking improvements would be where I would suggest. So I would suggest if someone wanted to add parking explicitly, I'd put road and parking improvements and tie those two together.
And as the mover, I would think that's a great solution.
I'm fine with that.
It might make the clerk's work slightly easier too.
And Mr. Cross agrees? Mr. Cross, you're good? Okay. So the amendment to the amendment has been edited to add and parking after, there's no line number, after road before improvements. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Seeing no, on the amendment to the amendment, Mr. Voland?
I support the amendment to the amendment. I would just offer up that I think additional trailheads would be an important piece of park access supporting amenities.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment to the amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on amendment number 4 as amended. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Voland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to amend it. And so it reads now, projects could include road improvements, road and parking improvements, and park access supporting amenities. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Then I want to do after park access supporting amenities, comma, such as additional trailheads. Then you can vote no.
Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment? Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment? Okay.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Quinn Davidson. Any further explanation, Mr. Voland?
Yeah, there has been past things that have gone before the Assembly where it was specified that no additional trailheads should be added. And I think this, if the Anchorage Bowl is going to support these improvements, I think public access has to be first and foremost.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, so in the spirit of what Ms. Zalatal just did with my amendment, I'm going to suggest an alternative way to get there to the mover, and that is to move before move your phrase before and park access supporting amenities, because I think the original author of the amendment has a pretty specific idea of what some of the amenities might be, but park access is a pretty substantial thing. It's not like an amenity, it's like a new feature. And so I would suggest, if the mover is okay, after we do parks could include road and parking improvements, additional trailheads, and park access supporting amenities. I think if you did that, you would get unanimous support.
Sure, that works for me, if the second agrees.
I don't care at all about
Yeah,
this.
it's-
My second is very flexible.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I appreciate the change because to me, the amenities are what will hopefully help people who may not access these spaces right now seek and find their way there. I don't access these spaces very often because there aren't any amenities there. And as I shared at the work session, when you want families to access them, being able to make sure, your kid can use the restroom before you head out into the woods or something like that, I think is important. Also, having enough pay stations, and not all the pay stations work if you want to collect the fee for parking. And so I like to keep the amenity piece separate from the access. The amenities should support the access, but I appreciate additional trailheads. I support wide public access to this space for those who would like to access it.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
After claiming I'm completely neutral on it, I guess one thing I would wonder about is the word trailhead is sort of like a lightning rod in this area, and I just wonder if there's any reason to add that, because it seems like park access supporting amenities would include trailheads, and I just wonder if, since this bond proposition doesn't actually add trailheads or even collect money, if it's just poking the bear, whether it's Bear Valley or Glen Alps or wherever. I don't know if Randy and Suzanne have thoughts about that, but that's my only reason to not include it, not because I don't believe in that. I'm having worked on park access for years at Great Land Trust, but food for thought.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Soltz is next in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Daniel, I know you'll be moving to District 6 to handle exactly what Austin talked about. I think this amendment, or this AO is designed to help the road service areas deal with access that's been established by the state or over time. Although I wouldn't exclude future access, I don't know where it would be. That, the hillside's pretty well covered, but maybe down Turnigan Arm. But I'm willing to go along with it because one of the tenets is put things in front of the voters and let the voters decide what they want to do with this. But I do worry about the headache that'll come along with the municipality looking to create state park access. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soltz. Mr. Voland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I kind of realize that it has been historically controversial, and I think public access to trails is paramount for me in supporting something like this, along with the wayfinding and the restrooms and all the things that could make the experience more enjoyable for folks who want to go to the state park. I want it to be more explicit, and I think we heard one of the testifiers from the Glen Alps Community Council say that they support this as a first step in the direction of having access be more dispersed. So for me, supporting this, it would make me a little more comfortable if there was that type of buy-in on the behalf of the voters. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest one more slight language change, because I actually agree with Ms. Zalatel's, Ms. Quinn-Davidson's kind of gut check on the term trailhead. And so why don't we stay consistent with the language that we have here, which is park access. And instead of saying additional trailheads to say either improved or just park access, right? Which is that same thing. It's just using the language that's already here. So projects could include road and parking improvements, park access, and park access supporting amenities. Then it doesn't use the trigger word, and at the same time it communicates the same message. It won't engender conflict as much.
I think I want to keep what I've moved. Thank you.
Mr. Volin, would you confirm that what is written on the screen is correct for the amendment, to the amendment?
That looks good to me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Volin.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask the body to support the language that Mr. Constant has proposed, and mostly because we don't want to muddy the waters here. This is about access, and I appreciate the desire to specify trailheads, and I love accessing, playing, hiking in Chugach State Park, and would love it if more people have that opportunity as well. But at this point, I do think we need to focus on what I believe is the main purpose of this ordinance, and that is to focus on the roads and the access. I think if we do that, then there's an opportunity too for further collaborative effort, leveraging other funds that maybe would have been used for a parking lot to be used for addressing those kinds of, park access points. Because I think that, in the Hillside District plan about dispersing access so it's not concentrated on a couple areas, so that those folks in those neighborhoods disproportionately feel that impact is really important and something that, we'll need to proceed very thoughtfully. And I very much appreciate, Mr. Volin, the intent of your amendment to the amendment. But I would ask the body not to support that language so that we can support the language Mr. Constant proposed concerning park access. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you. I have a question. So this proposition is describing what projects the service area, if it were levied through a bond, could pay for, right? No? Because when it says projects, sorry, I'm trying to read this quickly. I guess here's my concern, and if someone can answer it. I don't know, we might be able to pay for the road, we might be able to pay for the parking lot, we might be able to pay for access amenities, but once you get to a trailhead and I don't know if actually we can pay for trailheads on state park property. So that's another reason that I'm not sure I would include that, but it's more a question than a statement.
Yeah, if I might, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
This creates a new service area. This doesn't levy anything. Right, and so.
But it's talking about future projects that could be paid for later. And so I'm wondering if we would pay for trailheads in that.
Either by bond or special levy. So we just removed all reference to bond by one of the amendments, which adds the allowance for us if we choose to tax ourselves. We can spend tax revenues in any manner we choose. And so the discussion at the work session on Friday was the possibility of getting into a long-term agreement where we pay for a parking area on a long-term lease with the state. And so they would ultimately have the facility on their land, but we would underwrite it through this special levy process. So what this does is provide a maximum amount of flexibility. It can be bonds, it can be taxes, depending on what the funding requirements are. And I think what the discussion was on Friday ultimately was we can really make some good things happen with this. We'll be creative and bring all the parties together.
So just to summarize, you're just saying, yes, we could pay for trailheads.
Yes.
So it's okay to include it for that reason.
But not with a bond, with a levy.
Yeah. I mean, what I was asking is if it's bad to include Trailhead in here because we could never pay for that project through any mechanism, but you're saying we could. Okay, so I withdraw that concern.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Voland?
I'm going to change my mind and defer to the representative of this district, and we can go ahead and substitute in Mr. Constant's language, if you would repeat it.
Park access, after the word improvements, comma, park access.
So I guess I would change that, and then the second would agree.
I agree.
Ms. Quinn Davidson agrees, so it would read projects could include road improvements, road and parking improvements, park access, and park access supporting amenities. Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
The amendment to the amendment is approved 10-2. We are now back on the amendment as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 4 as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Cross?
Amendment number 4 is approved 12-0.
Ms. LaFrance.
I move amendment number 5 for discussion purposes.
Second.
Moved by Ms. LaFrance, seconded by Mr. Salt. You have the floor, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment would revise the shape of the proposed service area to include some of the communities along Turnagain Arm. And as I briefly spoke to earlier tonight, this is an idea that, and I can't, maybe Mr. Salt, you want to speak after me? I've heard some feedback from folks along Turnagain Arm, but it's incomplete. Their community council meets quarterly. It's not something that they have had an opportunity to discuss. So I'm a little bit hesitant about bringing this one forward without having had some more conversations with folks there. And if I could just stop there, Mr. Chair, and ask Mr. Salt to weigh in on the feedback he's received.
Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would agree with Ms. LaFrance that I can't remember when the Turnagain Arm meeting is coming up. They don't have time to respond to this. Although, I'm trying to read between the lines, I think in general, the areas bordering the state park would generally be in favor of this, as we've heard from others tonight. And we can, if this were to be postponed till tomorrow, we could probably reach out and get a better feel from Turnagain on where they stand. But I feel reasonably comfortable to move it.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I am probably okay waiting until tomorrow, but I think this is a very sensible proposal. The entire highway between here and Girdwood has what we're calling park access points with no developed parking and no amenities. And people go into the bathroom right on the side of the highway. And in some ways, it would be a real shame to leave them out if they, in fact, had any inkling of wanting to see improvements happening. Plus, if, and this is a big if, the Department of Transportation does 1/100th of the proposal that they're working on in relationship to new development along the arm, the highway, then these dollars would be exceptional matching funds to provide real world-class access and trail support. And so I would be really sad to see us leave them out if in fact there was will to be in.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Soltz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to respond to what Mr. Constant said, agree wholeheartedly. And this, again, originally was developed until recently to take care of existing access and make it less of a burden on the residents of that area. So I think anyone that has access, existing access, they know the problems that come with it, parking, traffic, road maintenance for the gravel roads. I think they'd welcome this because they already have the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soltz.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I guess I would advocate for waiting at this point, and the reason for that is they could be added later, as in the following April, and the reality is nothing is going to happen under this service area if it were to pass until a bond proposal or other proposal is brought forward. And so I believe it's very likely that some of the projects that would be at the top of the list would be for accessing, or some of the projects, for example, that were spoken to tonight, or some of those areas, and that probably a project along Turnagain Arm might, just by virtue of there being so many projects, be a little bit lower on the list. So my preference would be to wait until adding them. I know some of the folks who have worked on this, Joe and Roger from Glen Elps, are eager, to see us move forward and are hoping for unanimous support on this ordinance. Roger and Joe, if I can be so bold as to say that. But I am a little bit hesitant about adding the folks on Turnagain Arm tonight. So I'd say if the body really wants to do that, at the very least, to postpone it to tomorrow. Otherwise, they could take it up and ask to be added like next year. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sold?
I'll just make a motion. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make a motion to postpone indefinitely on this amendment.
Actually, I can just withdraw it.
Withdraw it? Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we can
Make a
do it
motion
that way. So I'll withdraw the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Soltz. And we are back on the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. Then from the members from South Anchorage and Turnagain Arm and Girdwood, is it your desire to have one more day and ask, or is it let's just finish this and hope lightning strikes twice?
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Soltz, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One day can't hurt. We might get a response from Turnagain.
Move to postpone to tomorrow.
Second.
A motion has been made to postpone item 4A to tomorrow's meeting of January 24, 2023. It's been seconded by Mr. Soltz. Any discussion on the motion? Thank you. Seeing no one in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to postpone item 4A to tomorrow's meeting.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Voland?
Did that work?
Item 4A, the motion to postpone item 4A to tomorrow's meeting of January 24 is approved 12-0. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute, 10-minute break. 5-minute break. to get going? We good? That concludes the fours. We have a laid on the table resolution. And what I am proposing is that we take that up with a motion to lay it on the table. It would be 5A, and then we would renumber audience participation to 6, assembly comments to 7, and adjournment to 8. The laid on the table item, unnumbered AR, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly approving the use of subpoenas to compel testimony and document production pursuant to Anchorage Municipal Code Section 2.30.085.
Move to lay on the table.
Second.
A motion to lay the unnumbered AR on the table has been made by Mr. Constant and seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reason we need to do this now is we have been working to get an executive session together in which we can finally see the HR investigation report of Mr. Joe Gerace and the basic details of how he came to be before us and what he did to our municipality. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night in which we're hoping to receive the documents, and so it's timely.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to lay the unnumbered resolution on the table.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The motion to lay the unnumbered resolution on the table is approved 12-0. This will be item 5A, which I will read the title into the record, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly approving the use of subpoenas to compel testimony and document production pursuant to Anchorage Municipal Code Section 2.30.085. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve has been made by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So this is a difficult document to move, but it is a necessary document to move. The charter provides the Assembly with subpoena power. We've been in discussion with members of the administration and the legal department on how to properly brief the Assembly on the questions that are ongoing relating to the Joe Gerace affair. The administration has offered that staff will be made present, but have requested the issuance of the subpoena so that the records can be handed to us under that order. This is a serious action. We've had council reviewing and couldn't find any record of this type of action before, and thus this is an unprecedented action. If you look at the back, Part A, B, and C details the authority granted to the chair, should this be approved, to issue subpoenas for the following documents pertaining to the hiring, vetting, and dismissal of Mr. Gerace, including but not limited to copies of any internal reports or investigations conducted by the administration, any witness who conducted or participated in any internal investigation in the hiring, vetting, and termination of Mr. Gerace, and any record of communication or correspondence to, from, between, or among any public official, including but not limited to the mayor, the municipal manager, and the human resources director, that pertains to Mr. Gerace's appointment, vetting, and termination. There is some conversation about whether this is too narrow or overbroad, and I believe that that'll be what this conversation is about right now. I urge your support.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is Mr. Cross.
Yes, my question is for council. Maybe Kristen can answer. Why do we have to subpoena? It seems to me that it almost, from my interpretation of why we're subpoenaing, is we're begging or almost forcing the hand to provide this information, but we approved Mr. Gerace, and I would think that we would just go, the administration would provide it willingly, and we'd go into an executive session and get to the heart of this matter, but I kind of, can you explain to me why a subpoena is necessary?
Through the chair to Mr. Cross. I think that the reason we requested a subpoena is because there is the constitutional right to privacy for your personnel records under the Alaska Constitution. Mr. Gerace, in public statements, has been, I guess, vocal about his, about the potential of him suing people for slander or libel or any kind of defamation claims in order to protect both, I guess, the municipality of Anchorage in the totality. We thought that it appropriate to have the assembly subpoena the report and then provide the contents of that report in an executive session.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Next is Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions about the scope. So with regard to witnesses, you have any witness who conducted or participated in any internal investigation. And then with regard to documents and records of communication, the scope is much broader to and from, and it really goes all the way through anywhere from the appointment, vetting, or termination. I guess I'm curious why we wouldn't want to have the opportunity to have witnesses who were involved in the appointment, vetting, and termination outside of any investigation that may have been conducted. So, for example, if the HR director was a part of the vetting, but not a part of the internal investigation, I don't think this covers the scope of having the HR director come talk about the appointment, vetting, or termination unless they were a part of the internal investigation. I read B as much more limiting than A and C. So I will probably make a motion. I just need time. I want to make sure my understanding is correct. And that I'm reading it in a way that we all agree. And then if that's the case, I will make a motion in a little bit to make sure that they all match in terms of scope.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Next is Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a similar question as Mr. Cross, and just being totally blunt, I was not satisfied with the response provided by the municipal attorney. This document that we're going to receive is going to be reviewed in executive session, and so the executive session itself and how we handle the recording of those tapes deals with those privacy issues. So I still don't understand why we even have to go through this process in the first place, and likely never will, but I'll get past it. Second issue, though, is the report that we are going to see tomorrow in executive session. Will it roughly encompass all aspects of what we're speaking to here, A, B, and C, or do we expect tomorrow to be fairly limited and then we will see further parts in future executive sessions?
Mr. Rivera, is that a question for?
That was a question for the municipal attorney.
Okay. Ms. Christensen?
I'm sorry, through the chair, Mr. Rivera, could you repeat that question? I got lost in there somewhere.
Sure, no problem. So the report that we're going to be seeing tomorrow, don't want any details, but just a better understanding of the scope of the report. Will it cover all aspects included in this subpoena of A, B, and C, or will it be more narrow in scope?
As to I mean, I believe that it would cover most aspects of A and B. My recollection is that Mr. Gerace resigned, and so there's not really other documents about his dismissal other than his resignation letter. But the report would cover the rest of A and B. And then C, any record of communication and correspondence to or from. I don't believe that those are attached to reports, but we can certainly provide those things.
Thanks. I guess if I can just ask a follow-up. So, and this is a bit semantic, but may be important. If, is there any substantive difference in this subpoena between termination or resignation, or would it pull pretty much the same information?
In this case, it would pull the same information if you said resignation and an employee had not resigned, right? That wouldn't pull any documents, but in this case, they're one and the same.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Solt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this is a question maybe for Ms. Christensen. So when we do subpoena an employee or someone that was involved in this investigation, what protections do they have? I mean, if they have something they don't want to say or what have you, what protects them?
Through the chair to Mr. Solt. Well, in this case, I think as it was relayed earlier, the administration has agreed to participate in the executive session. So as far as I know, everybody will be voluntarily appearing at the executive session. But if you were to subpoena them and they felt as though they could not normally answer questions. So to give some background, we do not generally provide personnel records to anybody without a court order or a subpoena. And so this is our standard process. We do that because we believe that there's a legal protection in being compelled under a lawful order that an employee is not making a discretionary decision to provide those records. Does that answer your question?
I think for documents. So I assume for an employee, they'd be protected by being compelled to talk.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Solt. Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Next is Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of struggling with the same concepts that maybe Mr. Cross and Mr. Rivera were. Why would Mr. Gervais, or I guess anyone for that matter, be able to, this is a question for you, Ms. Christensen, be able to assert slander or something similar, perhaps libel, if, I mean, the Muni is an entity, and so if the administration is sharing something with us in a confidential space that never makes it to the public, I just don't see, it's like you're sharing it with yourself. And so how, that's my first question. And then my second question is, so maybe Felix mentioned executive session tomorrow. So what's the process with, and maybe you didn't, but I thought I heard that. What's the process with subpoenas? Like what do we actually, what is the chair, it says that we authorize the chair to do it. What does the chair do and where do we go from here?
Through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson. I agree with you in some respects that sometimes providing records is like providing them to ourselves, basically. But with personnel records, there are certainly people who are entities, agencies, right? If you have a maintenance and operation employee and finance wants to look at the personnel records, right? We do not allow that to happen. We only allow employees to view the records who have a legal basis to view the records. And every time you go into a personnel record in the municipality, you sign a log sheet saying that that file has been accessed and why that file has been accessed. And so in this situation, if we're providing this record to the other branch of government, well, and trust me, me and Mr. Gates have discussed this, I think that there is case law that says that employees of a certain level, when they engage in misconduct, or even if they don't engage in misconduct, their performance is a public concern, right? I think it's likely that Mr. Gervais was at a level that met that standard, but I think it is gray, and in order to be absolutely clear about the legal basis for providing these records, in order to assure everybody involved that the records were provided with a valid legal basis, I think that subpoena covers that. As to the actual procedure for providing a subpoena, I think Mr. Gates might have a better idea on that.
Thank you. I think, as I think we've mentioned more than once, that this is a tool that's been in our code for a while, but in my years with the municipality, I don't recall ever knowing of it being used. So how exactly this will work, I guess, is it's new to me as well. But this resolution authorizes, as the code requires, a majority of the assembly to authorize the chair to issue subpoenas. This resolution isn't the actual subpoenas themselves. You know, there's another document the chair will now, with this authorization, be able to sign and send to whoever is the subject of the subpoena. And so that's some work that we need to get done before tomorrow night. And we have some work in progress to do so. I think one of the importances of a subpoena is, and I guess you probably recall, you know, in recent years at the federal level, lots of non-compliance with the subpoena that was issued, legislative subpoenas. So, I mean, that might be the case here, and then at least with the subpoena, it's not complied with. You can go to court and compel compliance, or the person who it was served to appear or to testify with documents could say, appeal the subpoena to court and ask for it to be quashed. So there's a bit of due process that just submitting a subpoena or issuing a subpoena sort of implicates or invokes these processes that I think are beneficial, especially when, like Ms. Christensen's explaining, there's a very important constitutional right involved.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Constant?
Thank you, and I'll just briefly speak to intent on the side of leadership. Ms. LaFrance and I have discussed and with the council at length that any approach to subpoenas will be very narrowly constructed and conservative to a very high degree. And so we'll follow the trail, but at this point, we really want access to that file so we can have a fair review of what actually is reported to have happened. Then we can evaluate whether the report was fairly done, accurately done, you know, credibly done. We've had many questions about the function of that department. And so, but I don't want to speak too far in front of the chair whose name goes on these documents, but our approach in the conversation has been this will be done very conservatively, narrowly.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. So Mr. Constant's comments raise a question. So I read A and B to get to the investigation, any internal investigation that may have happened. I read C to be about the general idea of Mr. Durace's appointment, hiring, his term of service, the vetting of him, resignation and or termination. Separation, whatever term you want to use. And so I guess if we're trying to be narrow, are we simply wishing to look at the internal investigation and then take up the broader question of how the individual possibly was in that position and conducted business in that position later and separately? Or is it the Assembly's leadership intent that those two are so intertwined that they need to be taken up together? Because I'm not clear from the document, because if it's the latter, that it's believed that they're intertwined, then I think you're missing the witness aspect of the latter, the term of service, while he was there, what was the oversight, those things. But if it's only as to the internal investigation, I think A and B do it alone. So I just need some direction as to what the intent for the document is. I do get the rationale from Ms. Christensen about why, but I also don't want to come back and do this a bunch of times if the intention is to authorize the chair to maybe issue some subpoenas to take up A and B, and then I don't know if the idea would be to come back to do a deeper dive after the first go at an executive session.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And just to speak initially to your question, if I may, the initial intent was, or at least, where this started from, was when we wanted to get the report or any document, and I don't even know if there is a report. I thought there is a report pertaining to the investigation that was conducted by the administration after Mr. Gerace's fraudulent credentials came out. So that was the starting point for this resolution to subpoena. And I think the vice chair, or maybe even Assembly Counsel, may want to address the broader piece. I think that it is important at some point to have access to records, to be able to, as Mr. Constant said, answer some of the questions or assess how the investigation was conducted and have some further context. But I don't know if that's something that is more appropriate later. But my thinking, at least, was some of that was relevant to the initial review of the report from the investigation. I'll go to Ms. Quinn-Davidson next, and then Mr. Constant. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So just quickly, from Ms. Christensen's perspective, it sounds like, and even Mr. Constance too, it sounds like this is a pretty collaborative process, and that just to cover our sort of legal tracks, we need to issue these or this subpoena. I don't know how that works. But it also sounds like the administration has not been very forthcoming about sharing information. So I'm just kind of wondering if there's any background information that would be helpful for us there. Maybe that's irrelevant at this point, and if so, you can just tell me that. And then I'm wondering how we would have an executive session tomorrow if you're just getting into this process of doing the subpoena tomorrow. I know, Dean, we're kind of going figuring this out as we go, but is the plan to have an executive session tomorrow? And if so, are we in a rush?
So because this has been a collaborative process and one in which Assembly leadership and Assembly Council have engaged with Ms. Christensen about, it's not a surprise. The intent to have an executive session, and given that we've had a number of special meetings recently, the idea of being able to hold the executive session, during a regular meeting was seen as somewhat ideal. As far as background information, nothing except that we've had this conversation where leadership has requested the report, a redacted copy or a briefing in executive session, with the response that the proper way, as you said, concerning legal tracks is to do it through this process of resolution and subpoena.
Yeah, sorry, I'm contributing to this. Can I just quickly ask a follow-up? So we would have an executive session tomorrow, so we don't need the subpoena to go through the full process to have the executive session, because we don't necessarily need the report. We're just going to have an executive session to talk more? Or I'm just trying to figure out how we would be ready tomorrow. I guess it's more a logistics question than,
Sure.
Sorry.
And my understanding is the report is available. I don't know the degree to which some of these documents in here would be available. I know the Vice Chair would like to weigh in. If you'd like to go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. Like Chair LaFrance suggested, we have a meeting tomorrow, and we did most of tomorrow night's business today. And so there's a good chance that we will break early tomorrow. And we wanted to be efficient with everybody's time because we anticipate a number of special meetings in the near term. Though there was some discussion among ourselves if we shouldn't take this action tonight and postpone any executive session till next week to allow more time But as Chair LaFrance had suggested, there is a specific document, the report, that may suffice and end all of these questions for us. And that would be the best of all possible worlds. We get the HR director, we get the various parties in the room, we have the report, and we have an open opportunity to talk about it. But should we not get to the point where we conclude we have enough information to base a fair evaluation of what occurred, these 3 points, I believe, provide the chair the discretion to proceed with additional questions via subpoena should they be necessary. But I don't believe they'll be necessary because we will have established that we are serious and they will more likely provide and present themselves where possible should more questions arise. And so it was stated that we shouldn't do this in such a way that we have to keep coming back and asking the question again and again. And so for, in my opinion, the Gerace matter, this provides broad enough latitude for the chair to act, but it doesn't act. The action is in fact the subpoena. And so that's where we'll be narrow and conservative. And so the conversations we had in drafting this was the exact conversation we had. And we settled on a little bit more broad of authorization so that we don't have to continue this conversation, but instead can get to the matter at hand.
Any follow-up, Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
I guess just to clarify, so we were planning to vote on this tonight to provide that authorization and then go into executive session tomorrow, see what we learn, see what more we need, and then narrowly tailor the subpoena that's necessary to those circumstances. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Constant?
That was what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Christensen?
I just wanted to say that I have been communicating with Human Resources, and I don't know that it's a problem yet, but the Deputy Director of Human Resources who was involved in the investigation, his wife went into labor over the weekend, and so he said that he would make himself available, but I am checking into whether that would be tomorrow night.
Please don't make him come to this meeting tomorrow night.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. I hope congratulations are in order. Mr. Voland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the Vice Chair summed it up pretty nicely. The way that I'm reading this is that we can subpoena all these things. You can, as the chair. Doesn't mean you're going to. We have an idea of one thing that we're going to subpoena, which is the report, but that could lead to more questions, and I feel comfortable having the chair be able to follow up on those things and subpoena more information as needed. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Voland. Mr. Sweet?
Yeah, I had a question related more to the background. Certainly I saw the news and media reports about Mr. Gerace, but my understanding of the necessity of the subpoena is that we haven't really been getting all the information that we have been requesting. And I want to make sure that my understanding of that is accurate, and I want to know just a bit more about sort of the historical context. I mean, it's not history, but you understand what I mean. And I suppose that would be directed towards, I guess, anybody who can speak to that, maybe Mr. Constant.
As far as historical context goes, I mean, the main reason why we are here with this resolution in front of us is because Assembly leadership requested the report concerning the investigation that the administration conducted concerning Mr. Gerace, specifically his employment at the municipality under false pretenses. And that is, I mean, are you looking for information like history before that?
If it's primarily based around the report, are there other specific documents that we would be, or that we have asked for and not received up to this point?
In regards to Mr. Gerace, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. This conversation is old, and in fact, this conversation to try to get this briefing, I believe, started in about October. So half a year is going to pass before we get to the end of this. And I had asked for one specific set of, not records, but details. I wanted to know which personnel files did he write in on behalf of employees he supervised to determine whether he, through his actions as an agent of this municipality, created harm for people who were terminated from this municipality? We have asked for any grant that he has either authored or signed to receive, any expenditures and contracts that he had signed and authorized. We haven't received those things, but those things aren't exactly germane today. What's germane today is the report that details how, what, where, and when they investigated the Joe Gerace experience. And so we're going to start with that and see where it goes.
And I would also note, too, that there was the scoping document that was requested by the audit committee that Mr. Rivera submitted as an AIM. I think it was it the January 10th meeting, Mr. Rivera? Okay, so it may be helpful to pull up that document as well. Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Ms. Christensen and then probably an amendment. Ms. Christensen, do you take the words termination and resignation to mean the same thing in this document? Or are you going to construe those specifically as to a formal termination versus a resignation?
So, through the chair to Ms. Salatel, because you're an attorney, I think that you will follow me on this one. All resignations are terminations, but not all terminations are resignations.
Great. I love that answer. Okay. So I'm going to move to amend. It's a two-part amendment. I'm going to start on page 1 at line 26. After hiring, so it would read circumstances that led to Mr. Gerace's hiring and oversight of his actions in his official capacity and termination from municipal service.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Constant.
I will read it again and then take it to the clerk. Hiring and oversight of his actions in his official capacity and termination from municipal service.
Did you get it, Jennifer? You need it? Do you forget it? Okay.
So I'm just going to move that one, and then I'll move a second amendment, so that way we can pass that down to the clerk. The purpose for the amendment is, it sounds like there are questions and documents we haven't received, not necessarily related to an internal investigation, but more broadly to the impact that the employment Mr. Gerace may have had on the health department as to subordinates personnel files, grant agreements, and his actions in his official capacity. And so that whereas clause establishes that factual basis, whereas right now the whereas clause is really focused on an investigation.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Constant was the second. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia votes yes.
Amendment number 1 is approved 12-0. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment number 2 is on page 2, line 12, adding a D as in Delta that reads, any witness who conducted or participated in the appointment, hiring, vetting, term of service, or termination of Mr. Gerace.
Is there a second?
Second.
And if you could read it again.
Yes, Madam Chair. D, any witness who conducted or participated in the appointment, hiring, vetting, term of service, or termination of Mr. Gerace. And this amendment goes to that secondary piece, I believe, that Assembly leadership is intending to look at, starting with the internal investigation, but also what happened during Mr. Gerace's term of employment. The records request is already there in the previous paragraphs, but not the witnesses. And so it just mirrors what is in the investigatory language. It's both got a witness component and a document component. And so for this other piece to the inquiry, it has now a witness component and a document component. So it's just using the same steps. And basically, if individuals from the administration are made available, fantastic. But if they're not, and reasons are stated, then the chair has the power to determine whether or not to issue a subpoena to have them come and speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I want to note that the second on the amendment was Mr. Constant. Is there any discussion? And the language is now up on the screen. Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve amendment number 2.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The amendment is approved 12-0. We are now back on the main motion as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the motion to approve the unnumbered AR as amended.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
The motion is approved 12-0. That brings us to audience participation. Are there any members of the public who would like to participate? If so, please come forward, state your name for the record, your council, or the area of the community in which you live. Welcome.
Thank you, Irene Queetnow, Sand Lake. I have stood before you and testified that for you it's all about power and control. You want to be in charge of everything. So when you are not in charge of something by law, you cannot give yourself the power to do it, then your pattern is to grant the power to somebody else who is under your jurisdiction. We have seen it with the clerk. You changed the code for elections several times to give her more and more power. After the last change, she is now in charge of the election, but also solely in charge and in control of who can observe elections. And now we see the same thing happening with the ombudsman. You want to have investigative powers that you do not have, and you can't give it to yourself. So you give it to somebody who's under your jurisdiction. And yes, it says that the ombudsman is supposed to be impartial, but it says responsible to the assembly. The clerk is also supposed to be impartial, and we have seen how that went. So in this emergency ordinance that you did, you're giving the ombudsman more power. On page 2, you say, whereas it has become apparent that AMC Chapter 2.6, governing the ombudsman's investigations, do not provide adequate authorization to access some municipal records and protection or confidential status for the ombudsman investigation in response to the whistleblower complaints. So you give him more power to access records that are personnel records that are closed by law, and at the same time, you then give him the power or a blank check saying, no, actually more power. It says on page 3 under C The records provided by the ombudsman, are still stay confidential unless the communication is evidence of an act of an agency that the ombudsman reasonably believes is criminal. So now he can judge if something is criminal or not. The ombudsman is not a legal person. And at the same time, further down, you give on page 3, you say, a civil action may not be brought against the ombudsman or member of the ombudsman staff for anything done, said, or omitted in performing the ombudsman's duties or responsibilities under this chapter. And then you go on to say that if somebody decides to file a lawsuit, he can't even testify. So you give the ombudsman more power, and you give him a blank check to be immune to any investigations himself.
Thank you for your participation. Are there any other members of the public who wish to participate? If so, please come forward. I don't see anyone, so we will move on to Assembly member comments. And we will start to my left with Mr.
No comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Volan. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Thank you, everyone, for being so patient with me tonight, and I'm sorry I got so frustrated and just trying to get things on the bond, but appreciate, particular to Courtney and Dean and Blair and Kent. I know that you guys are doing what you can, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Cross?
Nothing to add, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Zalatel?
No comment, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I'm just grateful to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Sweet?
No comment, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No comment.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Mr. Solt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just say we dealt with a lot of bonds for the voters today, and while I'm not a fan of raising tax caps or raising the burden on our taxpayers, I am one of my tenets, as I said earlier, is putting things before the voter who will provide our ultimate guidance on what they want, and we're here to carry that out. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solt. Ms. Dern?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I appreciate this spot here and the faith you've put in me. I thank everybody from the staff to each of you for helping me in the past few days, and I look forward to serving this interim session, and thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Dern. And thank you to all the members for being here, and staff and members of the public at another special meeting. I think it was really important that we took up these issues tonight because it would have been, I think, challenging to get through our regular business tomorrow without this meeting, so thank you for that. As we figure out details about tomorrow regarding an executive session, we'll let you all know. And I do want to thank the members for your continued focus on good governance and ensuring that municipal services are provided. And I want to thank our ombudsman, Mr. Hess. And I think it's unfortunate his services are so desperately needed right now in the municipality, but thank goodness he is here. And with that, we are at adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.